The Senate will come to order. All those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber. Those in the gallery and those on the floor will please rise as we are led in prayer by Jack Eckert, Senate Fiscal Officer. Please remain standing after the prayer as the senior senator from the 5th leads us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would you bow with me, please? Father in heaven, we bow this morning before your greatness and power and majesty. And Father, we just want to lift those up this morning that are without power because of the storms that we've had this past week. Father, we pray that you would help keep them warm, keep them safe. Father, we pray and want to lift up a prayer for those who are working tirelessly around the clock to try to restore power. And Father, this morning we also want to lift up the men and women here in this body as they are here to help further our state. And Father, we just pray that things will be done in accordance with your will so that we can move forward as a state and as a nation. Father, we would also want to pray for the staff and all others that move in the background, Father, that all these efforts will come together to further our great state and our great nation. These things we pray in your Son, Jesus, who died for us on the cross. Amen.
Thank you. Senior Senator from the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Reading of the Journal.
West Virginia Legislature, Senate Journal, February 17th, 2021. The Senate met at 11 a.m. Senator Blair, Mr. President, in the chair.
The senator from Logan requests unanimous consent that further reading the Journal be dispensed with and the Journal be approved. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Further reading of the Journal is dispensed with and the Journal is approved. Introduction of guest. Communications from the House.
The Clerk of the House announced the passage by that body of committee substitute for House Bill 2011, eliminating anytime requirements for part-time personnel to work during a working year.
The message will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee on Government Organization.
House Bill 2019, elevating economic development and tourism departments.
The message will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2263, update the regulation of pharmacy benefit managers.
The message will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee of Health and Human Resources. Communications from the Executive.
There are none.
Reports from standing committees.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 1, providing for parity of payment for telehealth services between service in person and service provided through telehealth platform, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass. Respectfully submitted, Michael J. Maroney, Chair.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development has had under consideration Senate Bill 61, expanding coyote control program through voluntary assessment on breeding cows, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Dave Seipolt, Chair.
The report will be received and the senior senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the second reference to the Committee on Finance be dispensed. This bill has no financial impact on the state budget. The fiscal note received from the state police indicated the passage of the bill will also have no financial impact on them.
Is there objection? Objection's been heard. Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a good bill. I support this bill, but it does have a fiscal impact. I voted for it for years. If you look in the past, it has always gone to finance. It has had a fiscal note from various agencies of government over the last couple of years. In 2020, it had a fiscal note from the Department of Ag and the Tax Department. In 2019, it went to finance. In 2018, there was no fiscal note. It's sort of been all over the board. So I just think we need to be clear about what we're doing. I don't know why we're changing things all of a sudden this year. Let's just communicate openly about why we're doing things differently. This bill's always had a fiscal note in the past. The fiscal note has come from different agencies, not from state police. And when it has come from those different agencies in the past, it's had a fiscal impact. So I just don't know why we're changing the scenario this year. We need to be clear and communicate with each other about fiscal impact of bills. Thank you.
Senator, be at ease for a moment. Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Continue to ask that this be and move that this be dispensed with, committee reference. I do have a fiscal note that says 0, and having fiscal notes within our Senate Finance Committee is a normal thing to request. We did request this along with the bill, and so being 0, as has been the customary procedure of this body, that we dispense with those, we're allowed to waive those from finance. So I ask that it be dispensed with.
Senior Senator from the 4th moves that the second committee reference be dispensed with. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted.
Further standing committee reports.
Okay. Reports from standing committees.
Your Committee on the Judiciary has had under consideration Senate Bill 275 relating generally to West Virginia Appellate Reorganization Act of 2021 and reports back a committee substitute for same with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Charles S. Trump IV, Chair.
The report will be received, and under the original double committee reference, the bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Finance has had under consideration engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 2358, updating meaning of federal adjusted gross income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Personal Income Tax Act, and engrossed House Bill 2359, updating the meaning of federal taxable income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Corporation Net Income Tax Act, and reports the same back with the recommendation that they each do pass. Respectfully submitted, Eric J. Tarr, Chair.
The report will be received. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that House Bill 2358 be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time.
Is there objection? The chair hears none. The clerk will read the bill first time.
Engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 2358, updating meaning of federal adjusted gross income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Personal Income Tax Act. First reading of the bill.
The bill will be advanced. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the constitutional rule requiring the bill to be read on 3 different days be suspended and that the bill be read a second and third time and placed upon its passage.
The Senior Senator from the 17th moves that the constitutional rule requiring a bill to be read on 3 different days be suspended and that the bill be read a second and third time and be put upon its passage. All those in favor will vote yea. Those will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, 0 absent and not voting. More than 4/5 of the members present have voted in the affirmative. I declare the constitutional rule suspended. The clerk will read the bill a second time.
Engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 2358, updating meaning of federal adjusted gross income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Personal Income Tax Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments?
No, sir.
The bill will be advanced to third reading. The clerk will read the bill a third time.
Engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 2358, updating meaning of federal adjusted gross income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Personal Income Tax Act. Third reading of the bill.
Question is on passage of the bill. Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a committee substitute for House Bill 2358 is just an update to the federal adjusted gross income and certain other terms used within the West Virginia personal income tax. This brings us up to in compliance with the federal law as well, to be consistent with the tax federal law for the tax year 2020. I urge passage of the bill.
Question is on passage of the bill. Is there discussion? If not, the question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will say or vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 absent and not voting. More than a majority of those present and voting in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the bill be made effective from passage and request unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective.
The senior senator from the 17th moves that the bill be made effective from passage and requests unanimous consent that the roll call used on the passage of the bill to be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 absent and not voting. More than 2/3 of those elected to the Senate having voted in the affirmative. I declare the bill effective from passage. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that House Bill 2359 be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Clerk will read a bill first time.
Engrossed House Bill 2359, updating the meaning of federal taxable income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Corporation Net Income Tax Act. First reading of the bill.
The bill will be advanced. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the constitutional rule requiring the bill to be read on 3 different days be suspended and that the bill be read a second and third time and placed upon its passage.
The senior senator from the 17th moves that the constitutional rule requiring a bill to be read on 3 different days be suspended and that the bill be read a second and third time and be put upon its passage. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 absent and not voting. More than 4/5 of the members present have voted in the affirmative. I declare the constitutional rule suspended. The clerk will read the bill a second time.
Engrossed House Bill 2359, updating the meaning of federal taxable income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Corporation Net Income Tax Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments?
No, sir.
The bill will be advanced to third reading. The clerk will read the bill a third time.
Engrossed House Bill 2359, updating the meaning of federal taxable income and certain other terms used in the West Virginia Corporation Net Income Tax Act. Third reading of the bill.
Question is on passage of the bill. Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the second of the annual tax updates. This one will update the West Virginia corporate net income tax to federal law also for the year 2020. I urge passage of the bill.
The question is on passage of the bill. Is there discussion? If not, the question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. All those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 absent and not voting. More than a majority of those present and voting have voted in the affirmative. I declare the bill passed. The senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the bill be made effective from passage and request unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective.
The senior senator from the 17th moves that the bill be made effective from passage and requests unanimous consent that the roll call used on the passage of the bill be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none. On this question, 34 yeas, 0 nays, 0 absent and not voting, more than 2/3 of those elected to the Senate having voted in the affirmative. I declare the bill effective from passage. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Reports from select committees.
There are none.
Introduction of bills. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that Senate Bills 326 through Senate Bill 360 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system.
The senior senator from the 17th requests unanimous consent that Senate Bills 326 through Senate Bill 360 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Chair hears none. So ordered. Resolutions.
Senate Joint Resolution 5 by Senator Carnes, Right to Farm and Ranch Amendment.
The resolution will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary and then the Committee on Finance.
Senate Joint Resolution 6 by Senator Seipold, Right to Farm Amendment.
The resolution will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary and then the Committee on Finance.
Senate Joint Resolution 7 by Senator Trump, Motor Vehicle and Other Personal Property Tax Reduction Amendment.
The resolution will be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary and then the Committee on Finance.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 5 by Senator Carnes, urging Congress call Article 5 convention to impose fiscal restraints on federal government.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over 1 day.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 6 by Senator Seipold, naming U.S. Navy Seaman 2nd Class Wilbur Webb Hahn and John W. Hahn Memorial Bridge.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over 1 day.
Senate Resolution 8 by Senators Stover, Romano, and Martin, recognizing 149th anniversary of Glenville State College.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over 1 day. Motions. Petitions.
There are none.
Unfinished business.
There is none.
Bills on third reading.
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 14, providing for additional options for alternative certifications for teachers. Third reading of the bill.
Question is on passage of the bill. Senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have chosen to come back here because I thought it would be clear to understand me in explaining this bill. Senate Bill 14 is a committee substitute for, that creates a third set of conditions for which a person may be issued a professional teaching certificate with the intent of providing additional options for alternative certification. This third set of conditions includes that the person holds a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution of higher education, submits to a criminal history background check, successfully completes pedagogical training or pedagogical course or courses in substantive alignment with nationally recognized...
Senator.
Yes.
One moment. In fact, I'm probably going to want you to back up. Members are having a hard time hearing you, so get closer into the mic.
Can I take it off? That would be easier. Thank you. I'm so sorry. That is exactly why I came back here. I was hoping to be more clear. I will start over again. Senate Bill 14 is a committee substitute that creates a third set of conditions for which a person may be issued a professional teaching certificate with the intent of providing additional options for alternative certification. This third set of conditions includes that the person must hold a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution of higher education, submit to a criminal background check, successfully completes pedagogical training or pedagogical course or courses in substantive alignment with the nationally recognized pedagogical standards or approved by the state board, passes the same subject matter and competency tests required by the state board for traditional program applicants for licensure. The bill also requires that teaching certificates granted pursuant to the new set of conditions be equivalent to certificates granted to graduates of teacher preparation programs at higher education institutions. To summarize, we are providing a third way to have more highly qualified, alternatively certified teachers in our classroom and have more of these teachers be teaching in our classrooms. This bill is going to help us with the many, many vacancies that we have in our schools right now that are being filled by substitutes, and we are hoping to get certified teachers teaching our kids. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question is on passage of the bill. Is there discussion? Senator from Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill. You know, this body's been moving in the wrong direction for a long time on public education. We don't seem to want to fund public education, and this bill simply waters down the qualifications for our educators. You've heard me say many times, public education's the backbone of America. If we do not educate our youth, we will graduate from school people that can't do anything, people that become burdens to society. I have to tell you the story again about Doddridge County. In 2008, Doddridge County was 53rd in this state in standardized test scores. Then along came a company called Mark West, built $1 billion worth of infrastructure in Doddridge County, and their property taxes went up. They abandoned us and funded themselves. They gave every teacher's position a $10,000 raise. They didn't water down the requirements, they upped the ante. They now have certified teachers in every position. They have psychological counselors in every school. Their kids have the latest technology. They have a year-round read and feed program and a STEM lab in every school. In 2018, just one decade later, they're 4th in this state in standardized test scores. That's the path we have to take. That's the path to educating West Virginia students, paying our teachers a good salary that represents the profession that they represent, a good salary that will get us the best teachers and the best people to become teachers, to give them encouragement, not make it something less than the profession that it is. You know, I'm a public school graduate. Alta Vista, Central Junior High, WI High School. In my career, I've gone up against the best from all around the world. Harvard, Yale, Connecticut, New York. I'd never felt like I lacked any tool to go up against them because I'm a public school graduate. This bill tells our teachers that you don't have to be educated as a teacher to be a teacher in West Virginia. You can be just somebody like me, happens to have a profession, happens to meet the requirements. We have to be in substantial compliance with the pedagogical education nationally. What does that mean, substantially? Doesn't mean anything. It gives the broad ability to put people in teaching positions because we won't pay them enough, we don't have enough teachers, but we're going to put a body in front of the desk. Instead of building up the teaching profession, this bill waters it down. I strongly recommend a no vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further discussion? Senator from Mason.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to say, as a public educator, I fully support this bill. The reasons I support this bill is while a salary increase is ideal, that's not going to happen right now. That's not going to solve the problem we have of nearly 1,400 classrooms being empty from grades 7 through 12 right now. What this does is gives another pathway for professionals with a 4-year degree to take training courses, the same classes that I took in my last 2 to 3 semesters of my 4-year degree, my bachelor's degree, to become a teacher. Teaching is not something people just decide to go into and say, I think I'm going to be a teacher today. It's a calling. Many times people realize that calling later on in life. Somebody who's gone through a 4-year college decides that I missed my calling as a teacher. This gives them the opportunity to do that without downing the standards for good teachers. They have to go through the same exact things that I did. One other thing I'd like to say is many of the best teachers I know don't have teaching degrees. Many of the best teachers I know are Sunday school teachers, childcare, daycare teachers, and this would give them an opportunity, if they have a 4-year degree, to go further. Hopefully a pay raise or salary increase can be down the road somewhere, But right now, this solves a problem we have right now with empty classrooms and helping our students by getting qualified teachers in every classroom. Thank you.
Further discussion? Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 2,081 vacant classrooms as of today. Got that information from the Department of Education this morning. 2,081 vacant classrooms, and that's just in the 4 major content areas. We need to do something about that. I recognize that. We need to ensure that our kids are receiving a quality education. This bill probably going to help fill some of those 2,081 vacancies. But I think it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't address the root problems that the senator from Harrison is talking about. Is it going to fill some vacancies? Probably. Is it going to fill vacancies with highly qualified teachers to further the education of our students, which is what this is all about? Not so sure about that. I think we need to spend time looking at the root causes of the vacancies rather than just trying to fill them, and match highly qualified people with those vacant classrooms to further the education of our students. That's why I cannot, at this time, support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Senator from Raleigh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I gladly support this bill, and it does address the vacancies, because we have a real problem in West Virginia where we have hundreds of substitutes. Some of them have been substituting for as long as 20 years. They get their pay, but they don't get any of the benefits because of what the roadblocks that we put in the way. This will make a pathway for those teachers to improve themselves, become certified, and to be able to go in to fill some of those vacancies and make a difference for our classrooms. We all know there's a problem, and I really don't understand why people would battle when we're trying to solve the problem in a common sense way. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Does the senator from Jefferson wish to close the debate? The senator does. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate the debate that we've had today and the discussions. I want to point out, because I don't want to confuse folks. We're talking about folks who might have a degree, let's say, have been a CPA, or someone who may be, majored in biology, and they've been working at a lab. But they decide, hey, I want to help our public education. I feel I could do it. They would not be exempt from any of the criteria that certified teachers in West Virginia have. This bill does not remove a single criteria or standard for being a certified teacher in the state of West Virginia. But we are giving them a way, a path for them to be able to get certified, to take the courses that are going to help them be a teacher, help them know how to teach, help them know the methodology, the standards. They're going to have to pass the content praxis, just like all the teachers we want to have in front of our kids. And it provides it in a way that won't take them another 4 years. They don't have to go back to school for 4 years. What I see for myself in supporting this legislation is fulfilling a promise that I have made to remove as many barriers as I can to have a certified teacher in front of every classroom in our state. I urge passage.
The question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. All those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 25 yeas, 9 nays, and 0 absent and not voting. More than a majority of those present and voting Having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 15 relating generally to infield master's degree. The bill was advanced to third reading with the right to amend.
Are there amendments?
Yes, sir. Senator Rucker moved to amend the bill by striking out everything after the enacting clause and inserting in lieu thereof the following.
Senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment clarifies the original intent of the bill that the new infield master's degree requirements only apply.
Senator from Jefferson.
I'm sorry.
Ask unanimous. 1 second. Senator from Jefferson, ask unanimous
Consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'm a little rusty. Senate Bill 15 amendment clarifies the original intent of the bill that the new infield master's degree requirements only apply to classroom teachers who receive their master's degree on or after July 1, 2022. I urge passage.
Is there discussion? Senator from Greenbrier.
Mr. President, will the gentlelady yield?
Will the lady yield?
Yes.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I know you all have made a substantial amendment to this, and I've spent some time with your counsel just trying to understand it, and I just want to make sure I'm clear about the effect of it, if you can help me through this. So I'm looking at the amendment, and I'm specifically looking at, let me give you a page number here, the bottom of 4, the top of 5, that first subsection 1. I'm sorry, I'll let you find
you said page 4?
Yeah, bottom of 4, top of 5, it's subsection 1.
Yes, I see it now.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand the scenario here. So let's say you're an elementary education teacher, and you've taught for a couple years, and you realize, wow, my students are really behind in reading comprehension. So I'm going to work on my master's as a reading specialist. Would that qualify for an in-field master's degree, which you would get an incentive pay bump for as a result?
Yes, it would. And I want to point out to the senator that in speaking with the state board, we clarified that this bill does what we wanted to, that they would have to set up policies that give the county superintendents and county boards very specific explanation of all the different ways in which a teacher can earn and keep an infield master's.
Okay, so in that scenario, even though it's technically out of field, you're enhancing your overall skills in your field, and so therefore it could be allowed as long as state board policy, as interpreted by the counties, allow it.
Exactly. That will be made absolutely clear in policy, but that is absolutely what would happen with passage of this bill.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further discussion? If not, the question is on adoption of the amendment offered by the senator from Jefferson. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
The bill will be re-engrossed, and the clerk will read the bill a third time.
Engrossed committee substitute for Senate Bill 15 relating generally to infield master's degree. Third reading of the bill.
The question is from passage of the bill. Senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is going to take a little bit of time. It is an extensive bill, and part of it, the reason is because we wanted to make sure we got it right. So this bill amends the definition of MA by providing that effective July 1, 2022, classroom teachers receiving a master's degree on or after that date cannot qualify for MA and may only qualify for an infield master's degree. It defines infield's master degree to mean meeting one of several criteria: 30 credit hours of post-baccalaureate graduate credit in the specialization completed at the undergraduate level as set forth on the classroom teacher's professional certificate and in the field that the teacher is teaching, or 30 credit hours of post-baccalaureate graduate credit in an area approved by the state board that enhances a classroom teacher's effectiveness. This is the part that the senator was wanting to clarify. It requires that the state board promulgate rules for the implementation of the infield master's salary and requires the rule to include the requirement that in order for a classroom teacher to be eligible for an advanced salary, he or she must teach at least half of their classes in subjects that are consistent with the teacher's degrees. Requires the rule to allow a teacher who does not meet the above instruction requirement but does meet certain criteria to petition the county superintendent for the salary increase. We put this provision to provide flexibility for those situations that, you just won't fit, one size fits all. We definitely know that it's not good to make it that way. So the criteria to petition to get that infield master's degree, if you don't get it automatically, if the school scheduling constraints prevent the teacher from meeting the above instruction requirement, or if the teacher was teaching subjects consistent with the teacher's degree and was voluntarily reassigned to assist the school or county in meeting a critical staffing need, or if the teacher was teaching subjects consistent with the teacher's degree but is no longer due to a reduction in force. Essentially, we're making certain that if it's not the teacher's fault, she's still going to get the in-step increase. Requires the county superintendent, after reviewing the petition, to submit it to the state superintendent and provides the state superintendent makes the final determination. So this bill is essentially going to encourage teachers to become better teachers. That is the intent. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question is on passage of the bill. Is there discussion? Senior Senator from the 5th.
Would the Senator from Jefferson yield?
Will the lady yield? The lady does yield.
So as we relate this to it, if you look at, does this fall in line with the National Board Certification guidelines as well, where if you look at nationally certified teachers, board certified teachers actually can improve student achievement by a certain percentage, does this line up with that same kind of standard?
It should, and this is the reason for why we worked with the State Department to make certain that that's exactly what would happen.
So in order to, when you look at this from a standpoint of and let's take a math, where we have so many children not necessarily be instructed by certified math teachers up to a certain level. So this will encourage people to get a degree in math and teach in that area, and it will incentivize them to do that.
I think so, yes. And it could also incentivize them taking other type of courses that would help them to teach math or teach better.
Okay, so in the areas of shortage right now, you have science, math, I think special ed. What other ones will this help in your estimation if this bill's passed?
So I will tell you, we already have a step increase for math, science, and special ed that we passed 2 years ago. This is not really changing those additional pay that they receive, but in the future, after July 1, 2022, it is going to encourage teachers, if they want to get a salary increase, to take courses, master's level courses, to be better teachers. It can be in the subject area they teach, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. There are master's programs on, and I'm not going to get it right, trauma, teaching kids with trauma, for example. I know that in speaking with Glenville State College, and they're going to love that I mentioned them, they are working on providing master's programs that are going to help teachers be able to teach remotely, for example. That's going to give them that type of training which they might not have. All of those type of things would qualify for this salary increase.
So in what's been happening in the master's program is a lot of people have been getting administrative level masters, and this is to encourage them to get a master's in the field that they're going to teach, and to try to, do we have a goal on student achievement we're trying to reach?
Well, yes, we do, and I certainly would love to see that be met.
But that goal is not in the bill, that's just something that we're trying, okay.
Exactly, it's not in this bill.
Thank you.
No problem, thank you for the questions.
Further discussion? Does the senator from Jefferson wish to close? Okay. If not, the question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question, 24 yeas, 10 nays, 0 absent, not voting. More than a majority of those present having voted in the affirmative. I declare the bill passed. The clerk has the title amendment.
Senator Rucker moved to amend the title of the bill.
The question is on the adoption of the title amendment. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the title amendment adopted. The clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 66, creating voluntary WVU rifle team checkoff program on hunting and fishing licenses. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
The bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 272, relating to West Virginia Employment Law Worker Classification Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
The bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 277, creating COVID-19 Jobs Protection Act. Second reading of the bill.
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that Senate Bill 277 be advanced to third reading with a right to amend.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. So ordered.
Bill be advanced third reading.
Bill be advanced to third reading. Bills on first reading. Senior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that all bills on first reading be considered introduced rather than by their titles and advanced to second reading.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. So ordered. Introduction of guest. Senator from Preston.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a normal year, this gentleman would probably grace our chambers every day of session, but on behalf of the senator from Tucker and myself, we'd like to welcome a listener representing AARP and the West Virginia Association of Retired School Employees. That gentleman is John Taylor from Taylor County.
Further introductions. Remarks by members. Senior Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, sometimes we get up and we want to talk about things that are happening here in West Virginia, and sometimes we like to talk about, we should be talking about businesses that are here in our great state. Mr. President, if you indulge me, I'd like to speak just a little bit about one of the businesses that here in West Virginia that is very dear to me and the junior senator from the 8th down in Putnam County, Toyota. Toyota has been a very important part of this economy here in the state. Toyota's been here in this country for over 60 years. It's been a place of employment for people in Putnam County, surrounding counties, in surrounding states. Toyota has, wasn't aware of this, but they have over 1,500 dealerships across the country. And just how important that they are, they employ about 36,000 people across the United States. They've produced their assembly lines have produced over 30 million cars and trucks in 9 manufacturing plants. And they've got another one that they're working on now that I know West Virginia at one time was in line for it, but we didn't get the project and ended up going to Alabama. But Toyota has been a very integral part here in the state. They employ about 2,000 people. They have invested here in West Virginia $1.8 billion. And I think that says a lot for this manufacturing company. And I want to commend and thank the state of West Virginia for creating the opportunities for businesses to want to locate here. Do we need to expand more and keep on looking for ways for business to invest here? Yes, I believe that we do. But I also want to talk about, many of you may have heard this morning, but Toyota is going to reinvest more here in West Virginia. They announced today that they're going to invest about $210 million in a plant that is down in Buffalo, West Virginia. I think that's tremendous. I think that's the things that we're looking for, things that we want to see. You know, we went through this pandemic and we've lost all kinds of employees. Businesses have closed up. But this is a little bit of bright news, and I'm very thankful that Toyota has seen that West Virginia is a place that they want to invest their money. And what they're going to do is they're not expanding their plant, but what has happened is the demand for their vehicles has increased, and so they're going to be adding a third shift at their plant, revamping their plant. It's going to take about a year to a year and a half, but by 2022 they'll have completed their work that they're going to do inside their plant for transmissions and engine lines. So I just want to stand up and thank Toyota for what they have done and what they continue to do in West Virginia, the people that they employ. They're going to add about 100 new positions once this assembly line has been completed. And I very much appreciate how they have been a very integral part in the economy here in West Virginia. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks? Junior Senator from the 8th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the remarks of the senior senator from the 8th be placed in the appendix of the journal.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. So ordered. Further remarks? Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't usually talk very much. I've talked way too much today, but I want to explain my objection earlier today. Since we didn't have any debate on that motion from the Chair of Finance, I feel it's incumbent upon me to explain. This year we've been sending bills to single committees at higher rates than we have in the past, and we've been waiving the reference to finance at higher rates than we have in the past. I just thought I'd look at one such bill that I thought would probably follow that path and see what's going on here. Are we okay or are we not? Looked at SB 61. It's a good bill. I support it. I've voted for it in the past, and I will absolutely vote for it again. I hope that we can pass it this year and then move on. But this bill does have a fiscal impact. It's gone to finance in years past. It's had a fiscal note in years past. This year, the only fiscal note in the system is from the West Virginia State Police. Not sure if that's me or somebody else. This year, the fiscal note comes from the West Virginia State Police. This bill doesn't have any impact on the West Virginia State Police, so of course the fiscal note is zero. In the past, the fiscal notes come from the Department of Agriculture or the Tax Department, not the State Police. Doesn't have a fiscal note from the Department of Ag or from Tax this year. It's actually a revenue bill. That's what the fiscal note has showed in the past, but we wouldn't know that this year because there was an error, apparently an error with the fiscal note. Now the reason I objected is because when you don't follow protocol, maybe we move a little too quickly, we make mistakes. I do it. We all do. I think this is just an honest mistake. But what happens is if we set a precedent and a simple, honest mistake is repeated on a bill with a major impact on our fiscal situation, then we have a situation. So I'd ask that we take our time, we communicate with each other, we look at the fiscal impact of bills and make deliberate decisions based on accurate information. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks by members. Senior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate concerns from a senator over here from across the aisle about any of single references, bills that the leadership has had, or any references to the Finance Committee that have been waived. I can assure you, Mr. President, that when a bill is referenced to finance, that we are looking at the impact on the general revenue of the budget to see if that bill is going to have an impact to the budget that we are constitutionally mandated to pass. It's taken as a great responsibility to look at that. In the bill in question, any revenue that's impacted is strictly fees. It does not impact whatsoever the general revenue of this state. The fiscal note that has been requested would have, if there had been any money associated with it, would have affected general revenue. And as a matter of efficiency and effectiveness and still given due consideration of the bills of this legislature, I think it's incumbent upon a chairman of a committee, especially our Finance Committee, to evaluate those bills very thoroughly to see if it's going to have a financial impact before any reference would be waived. And as chairman of that committee, I feel that that's been done. And I've even went back and even looked at it again since that consideration to talk about it since the objection earlier today. So, Mr. President, I thoroughly stand behind the motion I made earlier to waive the reference and dispense with it. So, thank you.
Further remarks by members. Senior Senator from the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of you all know the situation. The senior senator from the 6th, my junior senator from the 5th, and the senators from that represent the 4th. We've had some very serious issues with weather in our area. Many of my neighbors have been out of power, 7 of the last 9 or 8 of the last 10 days. We're still out. There's 21,000 people in Cabell, 16,000 people in Wayne. And talking to the Appalachian Power people, they said that this was worse than the derecho. If you remember the derecho came through quickly. It was summer. But what's happened and compounded this is on the 11th and the 15th today, and on Monday, we're having successive storms. We've got a state of emergency, and I really appreciate the governor declaring a state of emergency At our request, the senior senator from the 6th and I went down to talk to them to see if they would do this. But I just want to make sure that you all need to be keeping them in their prayers, because there's people without power for, going over a week. It doesn't look like there's any end in sight of some of the places where they're going to be. I chose to stay up here, and I feel bad about that because my family's back home. But I have seen more people at the hotel I'm staying in from Barbersville, from Huntington, that don't have many options. All the places in Huntington that are open are full. But I just would ask you to keep this in your thoughts and prayers. Our area was hit very, very bad. I've never seen anything like this. It has been beyond belief, the amount of people that are out. The restoration efforts are slow. It is no fault of Appalachian Power. They're trying to do everything that they can. But this ice, first we had ice, and then we had ice and snow, and then we've had snow. So it is getting worse, and I'd ask that you keep our area in your prayers. Thank you.
Senator from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the elegant remarks of the senior senator from the 5th be printed in the appendix of the journal.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Further remarks? If not, miscellaneous business. Senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Subject to announcements, I move the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Are there announcements? Senator from Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee on the Judiciary will meet today at 3:00 p.m. in the Judiciary Committee Room in the West Wing.
Senior senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Finance will meet today at 3 p.m. in room 451M. We'll have budget hearings from Marshall University and West Virginia University. The Committee on Finance will also meet tomorrow morning in 451M at 9 a.m.
Senator from Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Health will meet today at 1 p.m. in 451M. And just a quick note to the members of the committee, there is an originating bill on the agenda. I've shared the nuts and bolts of that bill with the senator from Boone. So if anyone has any questions and wants to get the cliff notes on that from me or go to the senator from Boone, I'll be happy to share that with you before we meet. Thank you.
Senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Government Organization will be meeting today at 2 p.m. in 208 West.
Senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Rules will meet at the adjournment of the chamber at the President's podium.
Further announcements. Senator from Education.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Education will meet today at 2 o'clock in 451M.
There are further announcements. If not, the question before the Senate is the Senate stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I declare the Senate adjourned.
The House will please be in order. Those persons not having privilege of the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time. Members and guests in the galleries will please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by the gentleman from the 40th, Doggett Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please bow your heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you to thank you for your many blessings. We ask that in our task as legislators, you give us the spirit of wisdom given to Moses in receiving your laws. We pray that our work here pleases and glorifies you, and that you allow it to bear fruit that blesses our great state. While we hear many voices speak to us in our role as legislators, may we hear your voice above all others. Father, use us in a way that brings glory to your name. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
If members and guests will please remain standing, we'll be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by the gentleman from the 28th, Doggett Cooper.
Join me in the pledge to the greatest country so far in the world. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members and guests may be seated. Reading of the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Wednesday, February 17th, 2021.
Gentleman, the 45th, Douglas Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as has been read.
Gentlemen, the 45th, ask unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read. Are there objections? There are no objections. For what purpose does the gentleman, the 27th, Douglas Smith, seek recognition? Okay, if not, lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For purposes of reordering of the calendar, House Bill 2014 on second reading, House calendar, has been transferred back to special calendar. So it'll be on second reading today.
Introduction of guests, reports of standing committees.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2260 relating to the procurement of child placing services. Reports back to committee substitute, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitute to pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Joint Resolution 1, Supervision of Free Schools Modification Amendment. Reports back to committee substitute, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitute be adopted.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 2500, Create an Act for Statewide Uniformity for Auxiliary Container Regulations. Reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources has had under consideration House Bill 2338, adding pasteurized milk and other dairy foods produced or processed in West Virginia to the list of items required to be purchased by all state-funded institutions. Reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass, that it be, as amended, that it be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The report will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Workforce Development has had under consideration House Bill 2290, initiating a state employment first policy to facilitate integrated employment of disabled persons. Reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to the Committee on Government Organization.
The report will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee on Government Organization. Are there further reports of standing committees, reports of select committees, messages from the executive, messages from the Senate?
Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 216, authorizing Department of Commerce to promulgate legislative rules.
The message will be received and the bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Are there further Senate messages? If not, resolutions, petitions, motions, bills introduced.
House Bill 2591, allowing drug courts to establish their own process for accrediting community drug recovery programs in certain cases.
Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the delegate console system.
Lady from the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the delegate console system. Are there objections? There are no objections. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2007, provide for occupational licenses or other authorization to practice by recognition for qualified applicants from other states.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? There are no objections. The gentleman of the 15th, Douglas Foster, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite simply, the purpose of this bill is to recognize a person's license from another state for licensure in this state and provide an avenue for doing so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to passage of the bill? The gentleman from the 30th, Douglas Bates, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that came up quick, as this bill has come up quick. Before I begin, let me just say that today's, in my faith tradition, today's the first day of Lent, and rather than give up chocolate, I was going to give up talking about bills whose passage I can't do anything about. So I may need to revisit the chocolate thing again. You probably figured out yesterday that I'm opposed to this bill from my questioning of the gentleman from Putnam. And I'm opposed to this bill because of the way it's been rammed through here under the cover of COVID in a couple of days, a bill that touches the professions of a huge number of people here in West Virginia. I'm actually covered by one of the Chapter 30 boards that is impacted by this bill. And one of the things I try to do when a piece of legislation comes before me that impacts somebody that is of the occupation or profession that the bill deals with is to reach out to that individual and get their input, because we all come from very, very different backgrounds. We all have our own life experiences. We all have our own areas of expertise. So if I want to know about the weather, I check in with my friend here from Kanawha County. He's been giving us regular updates. And if I want to know about education issues, I check in with my colleagues here that are professional educators and are retired educators. And that's sort of the way things work, I think, well down here. So banking issues, my friend from Vienna. So that's when this process works well. When it doesn't work well is when you mess with things that you don't know a whole lot about. And so I'd like to start with a question, if I may. I'm going to ask the gentleman from Putnam who provided us a brief explanation of this bill, if he would mind answering just one more question.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I think yesterday we were able to clear up the fact that a number of professional boards weren't able to testify before your committee. My question relates to whether or not during your committee meeting the discussion of compacts came up. Was there any testimony or any discussion with the committee members about compacts, professional compacts?
There are compacts out there, and this bill would have no effect on the current operations of compacts.
Okay, so was there any discussion, to my question, was there any discussion of compacts within your committee meeting, any testimony that was given by a professional board or questions from committee members about the concept of compacts?
There were.
There was? Okay,
yes.
Could you share with me what that was?
Basically, the question was real simple. It was just asking whether the compacts would be affected, and the answer is no.
And who answered that question?
It would be council.
So council answered that question?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So the best way to think about a compact is a reciprocity agreement. So back in 2018, this body, in its wisdom, entered into a compact agreement in the area of physical therapy, which is the profession that I belong to. And it is a voluntary agreement between states that come together that agree basically to accept other people's licensing as a standard to enable professionals to move freely back and forth and work in centres that cross state lines. Physical therapy was a charter member of the compact. And physical therapy was the organization, the professional organization, that led the way for other professional medical organizations to develop compact regulations and laws, including nursing. Right now, if I want to practice in another state, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, all right, I go on my computer and I apply, and for $95, $5 less than the minimum amount that's in this bill, I can get a compact privileges to practice in those states. There are 22 other states right now that have become part of that process, and multiple other professional health organizations that are moving in the same direction. And all the work's done for us. All the verification, cross-checks, all the things that are necessary to make sure that a professional that's got their hands on an individual that might be your mother, your brother, your aunt, or your uncle, knows what they're doing and isn't a bad actor and is not going to hurt some person, has been taken care of. With the passage of this bill in its existing form, we are in violation of the terms of that compact and are subject to termination from the compact. Now, if the committee had heard that testimony from the Physical Therapy Association or board, then perhaps they would have had the opportunity to remove them and other groups like nursing, architects, professional engineers, CPAs, and about 8 other occupations that are subject to some of the provisions within this bill. But we didn't do that. So in a few minutes, we're going to have an opportunity to press a button. And my guess is that most of the lights on that board are going to be green. And it's going to go to the Senate. And we're going to send them something over there that is fundamentally flawed. We can do better than that. We can do better than that. We don't need to do things this way. So I'll be voting no, and I would ask the members of this body to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 51st, Doug Hanson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill impacts public health and safety across a wide range of professions. And I'm not going to read all the professions, but here are some that remain in the bill, even after the ones were removed in second reading yesterday. Dentists, social workers, nurses, radiation therapy technicians, architects, dietitians, acupuncturists, massage therapy we talked about. These all have the potential to impact public health and safety. And yesterday I raised the question about professional engineers, and I would like to talk about professional engineers for a moment today. I have a degree in engineering, but I'm not a professional engineer. My friend from the 48th is, and there's a difference. I, with my degree, am not qualified to design bridges or roads, drinking water systems, wastewater treatment systems, dams, all of these types of infrastructure that we need to work perfectly. We need them to work all the time, and if they don't, people could die. This bill is a one-size-fits-all approach to a wide variety of professions that each already have systems in place regarding accepting licenses from other states, professional engineers included. Now, I have a process issue with this bill as well, which I think if we followed the proper process, we could have improved the bill. First of all, 2 of us were denied the right in committee to present expert testimony, to have witnesses called. And I've only been in this job for 2 years now, but I don't recall that ever happening in a committee meeting before. I requested that the executive director of the Board of Professional Engineers be given the chance to testify before the committee, and that was denied. The other part of the process that I'm concerned about is related to public hearings. If there was ever a bill that the House was considering that should hold a public hearing, it's this bill, because of the wide variety of professions that are impacted, each of which already deals with this issue in a different way. I submitted a written request for a public hearing, a timely request, which was denied on the spot, even though a public hearing would not slow down the process. A public hearing could have been scheduled even after the committee voted it out. In previous years, we would have been required to have a public hearing, but due to COVID, the rules were changed and it's now optional. But when we changed those rules due to COVID, we added the option to have a virtual public hearing using Zoom or something like that. That could have been done, it wasn't done. And I know that these Zoom public hearings can work because I've participated in them over the last year. The example I would give to you is public hearings held by the Department of Environmental Protection. They've started using Zoom due to COVID. Public hearings work. Not only do they work, but participation is up because people don't have to drive from miles away to get to Charleston at 8:30 in the morning. They could join from their living room. So again, I am concerned about the process, especially for bills like this that impact so many people, so many professions, the public health and safety of West Virginians. I wish we had followed the process so that we could get more input, refine this bill, remove those professions that don't belong in this bill, like professional engineers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there other members who wish to be recognized to speak to passage of this bill? The gentleman of 35th, Douglas Scaff, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Couldn't miss out on all the fun. I appreciate the opportunity to speak just for a moment, and I'm going to spare my colleagues from Raleigh and Putnam asking questions. I mean, I could call out, there were a couple inaccuracies, but it's week 2, you know, we'll let them slide by. The bottom line here is this: I did take a little offense that this is just a simple bill. This is not a simple bill. This affects over 100,000 people. 100,000 people. The 5 boards that testified, it affected over 20,000 people. So I took a little offense that this is a simple bill, but that's all right. You know, on every piece of legislation, I take an open mind. Whether it was introduced by a Democrat or a Republican, I want to look at the facts. I like the debate. I like the back and forth. Sometimes it does drag on, and it gets old, believe me. We all want to get out of here. But you got to look at the facts of the bill so you can look those people in the eye and tell them what you voted for. You know, I look at this bill, I didn't care. I didn't care who supported it. I didn't care who sponsored it. But I did want to hear why. Why? In my 9 years up here, I thought we introduced legislation to fix a problem, to fix something that needs to be better, or an issue that was brought to our attention. We don't create a bill with a solution and then figure out what the problem is. I haven't heard the problem. We didn't hear the problem once. In committee testimony here yesterday, I've yet to hear one person tell me what the problem is and what are we trying to fix. To be clear, West Virginians asked, not one West Virginian asked for this legislation. Not one West Virginian. They said, well, who's it going to help? Well, it'll help other people from outside our state come to West Virginia and work. Well, I'd like to challenge that for a minute. We did hear from the Board of Architects. The Board of Architects spoke, and guess what? They represent 1,100 people. 9% of those people live in West Virginia. 91% of those people live out of West Virginia, and they work in West Virginia. It's not an issue for them. Their process works great. Board of Realtors reached out to me. Represent 3,000 people. About half and half, a little bit more than half here in West Virginia. The rest outside the state. No problems. No problems getting their license. No problems working in West Virginia. Works great. Well, let me tell you about the boards. Why do we have boards? The boards, in case you don't know, they're made up of civilian people. Civilian people who work in professions and do their jobs because they kind of know that industry. They know what it takes. And guess what? They work in West Virginia. They know what it takes to work and live in West Virginia, and they know the standards that we need in West Virginia for a safer and better, not only workplace, but a safe environment for our consumers. I want to read their mission, if I can find it here. The mission right here. Let's see. I mean, you'll get a kick out of this. Mission of the boards of West Virginia to serve and protect and uphold the citizens of West Virginia when it comes, whether it's real estate, architect, or whatnot, the transactions set forth in West Virginia to serve and protect those consumers of West Virginia. Serve and protect. Guess what this bill does? This bill will now delegate the authority for establishing the minimum requirements in occupations or professions in West Virginia to other states. You can meet the standards in any state, and as long as you meet these two criteria, the two criteria that you have to meet: intend to live in West Virginia, intend. Doesn't say you have to, but if you just say you intend to work in West Virginia, you can get a license, you can do the job. Oh, I changed my mind. I decided I don't want to live there after you did the job. Go back and live in Florida or wherever. But you intended to, so you can get that license. There's nothing in this bill, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that says, and hold your feet to the fire, that you can't come in here. As long as you say you intend to live in West Virginia, you can come take a job from other West Virginians under the pretense that you may live in West Virginia, but you don't have to. There's no penalty if you don't. So let's talk about this. Let me break it down to something you might think about. What other situation would we allow or want this to apply to? We are letting other states dictate. Now, don't get me wrong. Some states, they're higher standards than ours, and I'll gladly accept those standards here. But there's a lot of states that are a lot lower than ours. And if they have a license from a state that's a lot lower, and they intend to live in West Virginia, and they worked in that state for 1 year, they're now eligible here. What if that state was Texas? What if it was Florida? What was a complete flat state? And you're going to get a license to be an architect building on the side of a hill here in West Virginia. You think they're qualified to build in West Virginia? I think twice. What other scenarios would you do? Should we let California write our energy standards? Should we let New York weigh in on our gun laws? Should we let Georgia give us recommendations on voter access? What about Kansas? Kansas has one heck of a personal income tax strategy. Let's let them write it for us. We wouldn't do that. But that's what we're about to do here. We're letting 49 other states dictate how we regulate over 100,000 people, if not more, in the state of West Virginia, how they live, how they work, and how they make a living. So the one thing I want to ask, and I want to leave you with this: who does this help? Who does it hurt? I'm trying to figure it out, because it sure as hell doesn't help West Virginians. It doesn't help those small business owners that have lived by the rules, played fair, worked hard to make a living here. Taking a chance that some others might move here, but it's not a problem now, because they're already, we heard my colleague from the 30th testify or speak, that you can already work here from out of state. Well, let me leave you with this. Let me simplify this as much as I can. I'm gonna make this as simple as you can think about. Put this in perspective. I got this book here. This book right here, Building Your Own Home for Dummies. What if the state of Mississippi, and God bless Mississippi, they say in order to get a license in their state, all you would have to do is read this book, and you have a license to build a home in Mississippi. Now, what if you lived in that state for a year and worked after you read this book? Guess what? They're eligible to get a license in West Virginia and build houses in West Virginia. Mr. Speaker, I don't know about you. Did you have them build your house in West Virginia? Thank you, sir.
Are there other members who wish to be recognized on this bill? If not, the chair recognizes the gentleman from the 15th, Douglas Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's a lot of things being thrown around in this bill. I know there were some questions about the compacts and the issue there. And if you look at 31F10, that specifically says that compacts are not affected. And then the $100 requirement, that's not in this bill that the gentleman from the 30th mentioned. It's not there. That's going to be up to the decision of the board, which is going to be charged the licensure that current licensees are charged. And going back to why this bill came up. And the problem is, you start looking at people, well, we have decided in West Virginia, and many other states have done the same thing, that said, you need to have the state's permission to go to work. I mean, you just have to go back to the 1980s to find out when somewhere around 60–70% of these boards didn't even license people. They didn't exist. And then at some point we decided, well, we'll just call it public health and safety and say that you have to have the state's permission to, some of them to be a shampooing assistant or doing upholstery. Those are some that we got rid of because we're like, this is nuts. You should not have to go to the state and beg for permission to work. You should be able to go to work and get a job. Then it's been said that this is reciprocity, that somebody from any other state can just come here and go to work. That's not the case. What this is an avenue for licensure. So if you're licensed in another state for a year, and not just a other state, you have to be in good standing with any other state that you are licensed with. So all the other states you're licensed in, you have to prove that you're in good standing, and the board you have to make it clear to the board that you have not had your license revoked. And going on from that, it's like you make sure your license isn't revoked, then you come to the board in West Virginia, and you come under all their rules and regulations. As soon as you come in, you have to abide by all the rules and regulations of the board of the state. So why not have somebody that wants to live in West Virginia and wants to move here, give them an avenue to do so? And we heard the gentleman talk about selling this state. So COVID-19 has created a unique situation where many people are leaving these heavily populated states and big cities to go to a less populated state. And we're being proactive. That's what this is about. It's not about reacting to a problem. This is about being proactive and trying to attract people to this state. When we've got people out selling our state, as we just passed yesterday, selling our state and saying this is the place where you want to live. We're going to reduce the income tax and say this is the place you want to live. Now, this provides an avenue for, well, you can come here and live here, but not only that, you can get your license quickly and go right to work. This is to attract people that are skilled licensees that want to work here. And I'll leave you with this. Arizona did this same thing in August of 2019 and attracted within the next year, they attracted 3,000. They had 3,000 skilled occupational licensees that came to their state and moved in. That's what we're looking at here. And the benefit with the reduction of the income tax and someone out selling our state is even greater to us. I mean, we have such an opportunity here that we say, hey, if you want to be a West Virginian, you want to live here, you want to work here, we're going to make that possible to you, and you don't have to come in and have the state's permission as long as you're skilled enough to operate in the state you're in now. And we want to encourage people to come here, and this is just one more of the tools in the toolbox to get people located here, and what we're doing is being proactive, not reactive. Thank you.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor, for what purpose does Adjournment 48 seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I request a ruling under Rule 49 as to whether I should be excused from voting on this matter, as I'm a licensed engineer and an owner in an engineering firm that is subject to the provisions of the Chapter 30 Board.
The gentleman did consult the chair prior to the session and did explain that the gentleman does hold a license that would be potentially affected by the bill. Would be the ruling of the chair. The gentleman does belong to a class of greater than 5 individuals and therefore would be directed to vote.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman, the 27th, Delegate Gearhart, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a licensed specialty contractor, similar request.
Would be the same ruling by the chair. The gentleman would belong to a class of greater than 5 and would be directed to vote. The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 65 ayes, 33 nays, and 2 members absent and not voting. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2007, provide for occupational licenses or other authorization to practice by recognition for qualified applicants from other states.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2013 relating to the Hope Scholarship Program.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? There are no objections. The gentleman to 13th, Doug Higginbotham, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill creates the Hope Scholarship Program, which would allow for parents of eligible recipients access to the amount of money that a public school district would normally receive to educate their child. An eligible recipient of a Hope Scholarship is a resident of the state and is enrolled in public elementary or secondary school systems in this state or eligible to enroll as a kindergarten student. The monies would be deposited into a savings account within the Hope Scholarship Program Trust Fund and would be administered by the Hope Scholarship Board, both of which are established by this bill. The duties, obligations, and authorities for the board to administer the program are established, including promulgating legislative rules to be approved by the legislature. Funding will also be allocated through legislative appropriation. This bill sets forth the scholarship application process and the parental agreement that must be signed by the eligible recipient's parent. Within the parental agreement, the parent must agree to use the Hope Scholarship funds only at approved education service providers. The bill defines a person or organization that receives payments from the Hope Scholarship accounts to provide educational goods and services to Hope Scholarship students as an education service provider. To be eligible to accept payments from a Hope Scholarship account, an education service provider shall follow all the guidelines set up by the Hope Scholarship Board. Administration, renewal, and auditing of Hope Scholarship accounts are specified. Responsibilities of resident school districts are provided, and legal rights regarding burden of proof, limitation of liability, right to intervene, and severability are set forth in the bill. That is the bill, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman from the first, Doug McGeehan, is recognized.
Yeah, can you yield for me real quick?
Does the gentleman yield for a question?
Certainly.
So if a child was approved for the Hope Scholarship Program, what is the monetary amount they will receive to spend at their discretion for, say, private school or some other alternative educational organization?
That is an average of the state aid formula to the county school systems, which currently is around $4,600.
$4,600?
Yes.
So if they're approved, they would receive $4,600, and it would be the spending would be monitored by some sort of government agency, perhaps. I can't remember.
Yes. Yeah, it would actually be audited by the Treasurer's office.
Okay. And they could obviously spend it on tuition if they wanted to go to a private school. What are the other items or objects or different things that money could be spent on? Do you know?
There's a whole list in the bill. I'd be happy to read it to you, but essentially it's textbooks, it's online tuition, it's professional services, specialty services. I'd be happy to read it all to you, but it's a list.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So, do you know what the average tuition is for private schools in the Northern Panhandle in my district would be for elementary, middle school, and high school?
I don't know about your region specifically, but I know statewide it's about 5,000 or thereabouts.
Okay. So up in the Northern Panhandle, where I represent, most of the private schools, almost all of them are all Catholic schools. And the average tuition roughly runs about $3,300 to $3,400. what would you expect to occur if suddenly many students were approved for this, what is it, $4,600
Yes.
payment that would cover tuition as well, and inject that money into private Catholic schools? What do you think the price would do?
Well, obviously, it's
price on tuition.
It's up to these private institutions to set their own tuition. But I do want to stipulate that this would be for only current public school students who want to leave the public school system to become homeschooled or private schooled.
Right.
So at least initially, tuition, it's up to them what they want to set their tuition as. But
Sure,
it would
but
be
you
a
understand the
small,
laws of supply and demand.
Yes, yes. But it would be a small percentage of new incoming students who would qualify to receive a Hope Scholarship.
So would you not deem it within the world of possibility that you have parents pulling their public school students out of the public school system, receiving this $4,600 or almost $5,000, and sending them to, say, a Catholic school whose tuition is maybe $3,600, maybe $3,300. I think it's the average the last time I looked it up 6 months ago. And the tuition at these private schools conforming to what the government is now passing out. Essentially bidding up the price of tuition for the students that are already enrolled in these private Catholic schools.
Well, I suppose that's always a possibility, but I don't think that they would want to do that, as it would raise tuition significantly on all the existing students who are already enrolled.
Yeah, but we could just look at the university system and understand that that's been the case for the last 20 years. The price continues to get bid up, right? Because
yes,
we have bank loans that anyone could get.
Yes, tuition has gone up in the higher education system for many years now.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
The gentleman to 36, Doug Rose, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the gentleman would continue to respond and yield. Now, I wasn't quite sure in your explanation if I understand how this is going to work. We passed an amendment yesterday that included students who have not been in the school aid formula, were not paid money as a part of the county's distribution, if they were homeschooled or in private school. Now, the original bill, as I understand it, is, as I heard you explain, it allows students who are in public school to opt out and go into perhaps homeschool, private school, tutoring, a whole variety of things. They can go out of state if they want to programs, whatever it might be. And the estimate on the cost of that when we were in finance was 5,000 students, 2% of the state population would take advantage of the Hope Scholarship, and that it would cost us about $23,000. But we passed an amendment yesterday that changed that and made eligible all students, whether they're in public school or not, for the Hope, and it raised the number from 5,000 to 22,000 students, including the private school students and the homeschoolers. And what that would do, if you multiply the 4,600 by that, is it would be about $101 million, and which is an additional 77 million. I'm not good on numbers, but the ballpark. About 77 extra million dollars that's not in the school aid formula but would require new appropriation. Is that the way that it'll work?
Yeah, so I want to reiterate that there was a 2% cap in the original language, and also this is not effective until 2026. So should we determine that the program is ineffective within the next 5 years, we would be able to mitigate that in the budget.
What is it that doesn't go into effect until 2026? Is it the program as a whole, or is it to include students who are not in the school aid formula at this time?
It's to include students who are not currently in the school aid formula, who are private schooled or homeschooled by the year 2026.
Okay. So if a student is in public school, opts out, they can get the money immediately, correct?
Once the bill is effective, yes.
Okay, which it should be, by its own terms, it would be effective for those students next year?
Yeah, July 1st, 2022.
So they would get 4 years worth of benefit, and the homeschool folks and the private school students would have to wait 4 years to get their benefit.
That is a correct statement.
Okay. I've looked at the bill as it was amended, and it's on page 11, and I'll just ask you, I mean, do you think it's clear that that's exactly the way it'll work, that we will open it up to students in public school to opt out, and we will delay the private school students and the homeschoolers for 4 years?
Yeah, it would be effective for them 2026 and 2022 for current public school students.
Okay. Now, I've cited some numbers, and I'm just kind of working off of whatever I've heard. But do you have any financial information to tell us what it actually will cost in 4 years to add those homeschoolers and the private schools?
I can answer for what it will cost next year, but for future budgets, I would defer to the Chairman of Finance for that.
Okay. So the including the homeschoolers and the private schoolers, we just don't have numbers on that. Is that right?
And we also don't know how many people will be taking advantage of the program in 4 years. It's a variable that we will have to take into account in a few years.
Well, some flexibility is reasonable in these kinds of programs.
Sure.
All right. Now, you said you were comfortable with what happens next year. How much money is that, and how is it going to work? Will it shift it out of the school, out of the county boards to the program? How will it work for us?
So if you actually do the math, 2% of the current students enrolled in public schools would be a little over 5,000, multiply it by 4,600. You mentioned the number earlier is about $23 million. If that many students actually take advantage of the program, then that money would be transferred into these Hope Scholarship accounts through the Treasurer's Office and utilized by the parents.
All right. And now that money will be a shift from the county boards and the money they get for students. It'll be a shift into the accounts that the treasurer has for the students who have opted out of being in public school.
It is money that is currently appropriated for public education. It will continue to be used for educational purposes by students in a non-traditional way.
All right. And in the 4-year program, we don't have numbers on that, but we don't have to appropriate that this year.
No, we will not. We'll have to wait until we see the results of the program at that time.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the bill?
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got real trouble with this bill, obviously, and it's because we don't have good financial information. And you say, well, why don't we have good financial information? Well, because we're not in compliance with the Rule 95A that requires us to have fiscal notes where the agencies go on, in effect swear as true what the financial ramifications are of a bill. Sometimes they're small bills and it's okay. Sometimes there's no impact. That's good. We always like that. But when we have a bill like this that is a game changer, a break the bank bill, we need to know what the numbers are. And you say, but we can figure that out in the next couple of years, can't we? The bill requires these students to be added to the students who opt out. That requires the private school students, requires the homeschool students to be included, and as it apparently says, in 4 years. Is that fair? I think that the gentleman's amendment that added those folks into the bill was to treat them fairly and equally with the students who happen to be in public schools now. That's not going to occur for 4 years. Is that fair? Well, the question is how much money are we talking? Well, it looks like we don't have a fiscal note. No agency has told us. We did have the Education Department come and say that they estimated $23 million. But beyond that, we don't have anything. In a floor amendment, we added $77 million to this bill. And you say, well, but if we don't have to pay it now, maybe that's going to be okay. That's not fiscally responsible. And you say, well, what should we do? Process matters. We have a lot of new members in this body, and you will discover that the process itself leads to good conclusions. This is the finest decision-making process in the world. It's tried and true, it works. But part of that is having it operate on valid information. How do we get that? For years and years, under Rule 95A, we've required the agencies to estimate what the costs are going to be for a particular legislative enactment. Now, we haven't done that this time. And so what are we left with? We're left with pure speculation about the cost of this bill. Everybody wants to treat all of the homeschoolers and private schoolers fairly and equally. Certainly we want to do that. But what's it going to cost? The amendment that blew up the budget is actually the one that was offered to put a cap on the amount paid to each student. And it's that cap that would be fair. And I think the amendment that lost was $2,500. It could be another amount. If we were given financial information about how much it would cost at different levels and different caps, then we would be able to make a reasonable decision. It's a very unusual process that a bill that has this kind of financial impact does not go back to finance to have the finance committee study it very carefully and determine how much money we're really talking. That didn't happen. $77 million was added to the budget yesterday, and it didn't go back to finance. And you say, well, is it too late to go back to that? Well, you know, third reading is, feels like it's a little late, certainly. But we didn't get that. $77 million added in until on second reading. And it dramatically changes the whole program. And it doesn't just affect the school county budgets, because these children that we're talking about who are homeschooled and who are already in private schools, those children and money for those children is not in the county budget. It will have to come in as an addition from the state budget. So we're not going to have the numbers just a matter of shifting, because when the original bill was presented, Education testified very clearly, we're shifting money. We're not adding money to the budget. We're shifting it from the county boards to the families. Big difference in adding $77 million to the amount that we have to appropriate outside the school aid formula. And I tried to find out from my county board and was not able to find out what the federal funds are that would go with these students in the shift over. It's my understanding that the federal funds go by program, and that some of those funds will shift from the county board to the private schools. Now, it will not shift to the homeschoolers, but it would shift to the private schools, and further reducing the amounts available to the county boards. And the thing that we need to understand is, after you've been here a while, you understand that you're going to see people in the grocery store and at church who are going to say, why'd you do that? What was the information you had to make your decision? And I've got to say, I don't have good financial information. It didn't happen. There's no fiscal note. There's absolutely no documentation of what's going to happen to the budget based on this bill. We didn't do it. We had a floor amendment to not cap the amount available, and so we end up saying we're going to spend $23 million on a shift from the county boards for 4 years to only benefit the students who are in public schools right now, and we'll get around to the homeschoolers and the private school folks in 4 years. That's going to be hard to explain to people, how we did that with no financial information. We need fiscal notes, not just on this bill, but on any number of bills that affect the finances. We need bills to go through Finance Committee whenever they have a fiscal impact. That doesn't always happen. It did on this bill. And we in finance studied it and reviewed it, and the committee voted to approve it and send it to the floor. But it was a $23 million program that shifted from the county boards to the families. It wasn't a $77 million addition required through the state budget. Totally different bill because of the amount of money involved. So I would just urge the members to review this very carefully and consider your posture as you review bills that have huge financial impacts. It's not a matter of being conservative or progressive or anything. It's a matter of being cautious and wary. It is a matter of having bills that will surprise you and disappoint you. And I would say in this case, this is a bill that we ought to vote down. We can come back if we're going to treat people fairly in 4 years or 3 years or whatever it might be. We've got plenty of time to fix it. And a vote today should be, I want to fix it. Doesn't have to be a vote that I don't approve of the program. It's a vote, I want to fix it. I don't want to make decisions that are fiscally irresponsible. I want to make decisions that are safe and best for the best interest of all children and all parents and all school board required activities. So in short, we're confronted with one of, in my experience, one of the largest floor amendments that I can remember at $77 million. And I think that it causes me to be cautious, causes me to be wary and conservative. So, Mr. Speaker, I will be voting against this bill. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman from the 43rd, Delegate Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak to the bill? Article 12 of the West Virginia Constitution begins with a very simple phrase. The legislature shall provide by general law for a thorough and efficient system of schools. Our constitutional duty is to ensure that we have efficient, free schools. It does not say anything in the Constitution that little Johnny, who wants to go to a private school, can go, and the West Virginia will pay for it with public funds. It says nothing in there about that. I want to be upfront and open. I have no problem with private schools, and I have no problem with homeschooling. If that works best for people's families, I totally support it, and I totally understand it and get it. However, I just agree that the public funds should stick with the public schools, because as a teacher myself, I see the needs in our classroom, the supplies that we don't have, the lack of staff. If we had more funding to provide more teachers, that would be amazing. I would love it. This bill also is going to allow certain schools in this state to actively discriminate. Not just to the children, to the students. And we're going to pay for it, but there's schools that I couldn't, if I have children one day, as we discussed yesterday, maybe, but if I have children one day, maybe I wouldn't even be able to send my children to this school, to a school, and use this program and have West Virginia pay for it. So for these reasons, I urge this body to please reject this bill, keep public funds. We can go back and work this over again. I have no problem with private schools and homeschooling and giving them a more fair advantage, but I don't believe we should be doing it at the expense of our public school funds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 67th, Delegate Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly oppose this bill. The effect of the bill will be to siphon money off from public schools, give it to private schools, and thereby, I believe, weaken our public schools. We should not do that. Now,
as the gentleman from Randolph just indicated yesterday, it was explained on the floor that the provision in the U.S. or in the state constitution requiring a thorough and efficient system of free schools means that we shouldn't put an income cap on the people who can receive this money. I think that is an erroneous interpretation of the Constitution. That applies to money given to the public schools. It does not apply to money, public money, that is awarded to private schools. In that kind of a situation, I think it is thoroughly within the Constitution that we say, okay, if you're going to do this, we're going to restrict it to low-income people or low and middle-income people or whatever group of people we think applies. I think that is quite proper. Finally, yesterday the House had an opportunity to make sure that these schools, these private schools, which will be getting public money, would not be permitted to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, sexual orientation, or disability. The House chose to reject that opportunity. I think that was a serious mistake, and it is a serious flaw in this bill. I know it was explained that there is a provision in here that says that a provision of the U.S. Code, which I regard as simply a mild admonishment, thou really shouldn't discriminate, covers the situation. I don't think it does. So for those two reasons, I think we should reject this bill. Thank you.
Gentlelady from the 4th, Delegate Zukov.
Thank you. I'm going to reiterate a little bit of what I said the other day, but will the Vice Chair of Education yield?
Gentleman yields.
Certainly.
Thank you, my friend. I am a little, I have a few questions. I didn't see this in the bill, and maybe I missed it. How long does a child have to be enrolled in public school before they're eligible for this funding? Do they have to be there a year?
The code is silent to that. However, the Treasurer's Office and the board can come up with rules, and which of course we in the legislature have to approve, to stipulate a time requirement.
But the way the bill is written, it could say that we pass this bill, it goes through the Senate, the bill is passed, and people can pull their children out of private school, say the last month of the year, send them to public school, and as the bill is written now, they could then receive the Hope Scholarship money to go back to their private schools next year.
As I said, this bill is silent to this issue to give flexibility to the Treasurer's Office to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
But that is an option, right? That would be a possibility?
So long as the Treasurer's Office and the board stipulate that in the rules, yes.
Okay, thank you. The other question I wondered about, I know within reading the bill, even the students who are going to go to private schools, they have to send their information, testing information, homeschoolers, to the Board of Education in the county where they reside. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I don't think council, we couldn't really hear all of
the
the
way
question.
I read the bill, the students in the county, if they receive the Hope Scholarship, those entities still have to send their testing and educational data to the County Board of Education, where they reside.
Well, I don't think it's in this bill, but I think in other sections of code, yeah, the private schools do have to do that. Okay. The county provides this definition to the educational service provider. Yeah.
Okay. So that's still an awful lot of administrative work for the county officials that have to follow up on this. We're giving the school aid formula amount to the students that are going to have this Hope Scholarship. And are we giving them any money to take care of the administrative burden that they're going to have for those private school and homeschool students?
No, I don't believe we are.
Okay, thank you. One last question. If a student is a recipient of the Hope Scholarship and they get the money, and I understand the way I read it, it'll be in 2 increments, first semester, second semester. If they receive that money and for some reason they choose not to stay in that school, would the public school system have to take that child back in?
Yes, the public school system can't deny a student if they wanted to transfer from private school or homeschool back into the public school system. I believe that is current law, and I don't think that would change even if we pass this bill.
And I understand that given the money that they would already receive, I don't see anything in there that changes the amount of the date after October 1st that the school boards get the money for their children. This would, and it doesn't get amended to my knowledge, that after that happens, if somebody chooses, I know they'll have to repay the scholarship, I get that, but are we going to make the school systems whole if that child chooses to go back to public school?
Well, first of all, let me state that the remaining funds in the account would then be transferred back to the public school system, so that would be in place. I mean, I think you said it best. They would have to pay it back should there be issues.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the bill?
Yes, lady is recognized.
Okay. I just want to make a few points. I'm also against this bill, as you can probably figure out. There aren't many other states in the country that have ESAs. This is fairly new. This nicely named bill, Hope Scholarship, I believe, as my fellow delegate said, goes against Article 12 of the West Virginia Constitution that we took an oath to uphold when we became House of Delegate members. Our obligations to fund a system of free schools, not to divert funding to private, religious, or homeschool students, and certainly not to send public money to government organizations that can discriminate against our West Virginia children. Yesterday, the chair of education told us that the discrimination clause is something that should be taken up by the West Virginia Human Rights Commission. For those of you that are new, for years this body has tried to take up legislation that would allow that to happen, but we can't get the bill before the body. And I think that this legislation is also going to be setting us up for lawsuits. So we're going to have some funding for lawsuits that we're going to need in addition to the fiscal note that we've already seen. Because we're trying to impose our belief on others by giving this money to religious schools that allow them to then discriminate against children. That's not the role of government. We shouldn't be using public funds for religious education. We have a separation of church and state establishment clause in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that we also took an oath to uphold when we took the oath of office to be a House of Delegate member. And that was established, and we have plenty, if you're a student of history, that was established because early Americans feared government involvement in their churches. We're doing just the opposite now in this bill. And for those of you who are new, and for those of you who might believe the rhetoric of the last 4 years or so, I am a West Virginia Democrat, I'm a moderate, I'm also a born-again Christian, and my faith is very important to me. So this isn't about religion for me. I pray for this body, everybody in this body every day, that we will do the right thing and we will follow God's guidance. And I pray for discernment every day before I speak before this body. That's important to me. So for those of you who think that my faith might not be as important to you as yours is, and that's why we're having this discussion, that's just completely untrue. So I don't think, and it's part of my belief, I think it's wrong for us to discriminate. I was brought up in the Catholic faith initially, and was taught to believe that we're all created in the image and likeness of God, and that therefore we're all worthy of love, we're all worthy of education, and we shouldn't be discriminated against. And my faith also teaches me to witness for Christ in my words and my action. I might be the only Christian that somebody ever comes in contact with. And if they're coming to my church and I'm discriminating against them because of who they are, I might be the only person that they ever come in contact with that could bring them to Christ. And that really bothers me that we're going to eliminate the option for children to go to a religious school when we're not going to take them because of their beliefs or how they feel in their body, that we're going to discriminate against them. I just think that's wrong. These are children. I also think we've talked a lot about economic development this year, right? We've talked about we want other people to come to West Virginia. We know, number one, the fairness bill is needed because there are a lot of Fortune 500 companies. If you don't have a fairness, if you don't have anti-discrimination clauses in our West Virginia laws, they're not coming to West Virginia. Bottom line. We also haven't talked about schools and the school system as economic development. I know from having done some economic development in the Wheeling area, with my past jobs, that's one of the first things that employers look at when they're coming to a new area. How strong are the school systems? At the time when I was there, Ohio County was the #1 school system in the state of West Virginia, and it helped them draw businesses to that community. It's important. And I also think that finally, this is all about the children. That's why I ran for the House of Delegates, because I believe in the future of West Virginia, and I believe that that future is our children. And I think that the percentage of the cap that we have on this bill, because we aren't going to get to the greater number where everybody can go until 2026, 2027, it is going to keep a lot of little Johnnies and little Sallys from having opportunities because their parents don't want to homeschool them, and they don't have a private school in their area to go to. You've heard that argument from me already this year. So who does this bill help? This is going to help families who can already afford and send their children to private schools and religious institutions. They'll now be subsidized by the state. My children went to a religious school. One of them went all the way through Catholic education in Marshall County. The other one went for half the time, and then because of sports and her social, she was much more social than my other child. She went to public education for the remainder of her school terms. So I've seen both. And fortunately, I could afford to send my child, and if I couldn't, my church would help me pay for that. So I don't believe that we should be subsidizing private education in this state with public money. It's not what it says in the Constitution. And finally, who does this bill hurt? It's going to hurt the students of West Virginia who won't have access to the program for a variety of reasons. You can think of all of them just like I can. And finally, it's going to help dismantle our public school system in West Virginia. And I don't think that's fair to the rest of the children who are going to have no options but to go to those schools. And for those reasons, my friends, I'm going to be voting against this bill, and I urge you to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady with 51st, Dr. Fleshour, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk a little bit about history. I am a student of the West Virginia Constitution and served for 18 years as the chair of the Constitutional Revision Committee, which the gentleman from Jefferson served on for many years. One of the things that is distinctive about our state constitution is that we started during the Civil War. We had a disagreement among the North and the South, and our states separated. Many people realize that one of the big motivations was slavery, that we thought it was wrong for people to own other people. But another reason that isn't talked about so much is that people in Western Virginia did not have access to schools. Virginia had a system of private schools, and one of the most important things that we did when we became a state is that we set up a system of free and efficient public schools. That was very purposeful. And I think it's something that we should be really, really proud of, that we have public schools and that we have good public schools. I also want to cite a West Virginia case that interpreted the Human Rights Act, which we've talked about a little bit today. It's the Allen case, and it says, discrimination in West Virginia is akin to treason because of the roots of our state. So I don't want to vote for something that harms public schools, and this bill will. This will harm one of the institutions that we set up when we became a state. This will harm public schools, and it also will permit discrimination. So for both of those reasons, which are both historical and have every relevance today, I urge a no vote on this bill.
The gentleman with the 16th, Dr. Hornbuckle, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to rise in opposition today because I'm not sure what we're doing here. Now, the concept at hand is a good one, I think, but I don't think it's well thought out enough to implement it in a just way. What are we doing here? So I've heard a couple things that have been said on the floor in committee, and the first one, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, because one of the reasons I've heard was this bill is created to help with equity and fairness and opportunity for all. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt on that one, and I'm going to accept that. But I also know that there are other pieces of legislation that do those very things. So if that is a genuine sentiment, I submit that is a fair point, because we can create all those things with legislation that is in the hopper. Now, number two, I'm not so sure about. That's the one I'm not so sure about. And that one is to promote choice. School choice, as a matter of fact. And I think this bill, the way constructed, is actually anti-choice. I think it's anti-choice. One of the first reasons that I think it is anti-choice, as the lady from the 4th pointed out, she talked about religion freedom. And this bill, it violates the core fundamental principle of religious freedom. We are going to be paying for religious education with taxpayer funds. I repeat, we are going to be paying for religious education with taxpayer funds. You're not giving them the choice. Now, I myself, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Hindu, I love it all. But that is my right. That is my choice. Now, while I might not agree with it, others feel the way they do. But that is their right. And I would venture to say that there are some out there that might not be too happy if they were funding a Muslim school. I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to say that. I also think that it's going to subject some of those schools to unnecessary government audits, because now they have public dollars in them. And that is one of the reasons that private schools are erected, to have looser regulations on their way to their mission of educating their population. Number two, and this should resonate with probably 90% of this body, it's going to just be awfully hard for our rural students. And we've talked about it back and forth about the transportation issue, but the bottom line is there's going to be an extra cost to get some of our bravest and best mountaineers from up in the hollers to some of these schools if they so choose to go to one of them. Low-income students. This voucher is roughly going to provide about $4,670. On average, our private schools are probably going to ring in at about $6,000, which is still going to leave a gap for those students. So is this truly creating an equal playing field for them to be able to go to one of these schools? Number three, students with disabilities. One of the best things about our public schools is that it mandates quality and quantity of services. for children with disabilities. And that is vastly important, and lest we not forget that. Number 4, and all of us in this body are trying to do this, and I do know that for sure. And we will get there together. But it's classroom size. Classroom size. Now, I've had a cousin that went to the Lindsley School. I've had the great gentleman from the 17th. He went to Huntington St. Joe. Awesome guy, super smart, bright. Had a lot of friends that went to Charleston Catholics. I think private schools are a great thing. But one of their strengths is class size. So if we start putting an extra amount of kids, too many maybe, in the private school, we're going to diminish one of their biggest strengths, again, which is class size. On the other side of that, with the public schools, is the class size. So now what we're going to do, and studies have shown, oftentimes in some places, it's a small amount of kids that trickle out. So let's say you got a classroom that has 25 students in it. And now you have 4 of them go away. So what you have there is you have 4 less students of funds to be there, but they're still going to have to provide from the same overhead, the infrastructure in the school. So that school is going to be operating on less dollars to provide what should be that same level of education. So mathematically, it just doesn't make sense. Finally, it's going to affect us. And it's not going to be today. It's not going to be tomorrow. It might not be 2 years from now, or 5 years perhaps. But we have seen pieces of legislation, and this one falls into the same category. We are chipping away at public education. And it's going to affect us all. Because as many kids that we might be able to help with some of these pieces of legislation, and believe you me, we will help them. Just as many we're going to hurt, if not more, with hurting our public education system. So we're going to reduce the intellect of our population. And that's going in reverse. So, and I can't take credit for this, it's the wise, sage veteran from the 34th, and we've been having some mature conversations and reflecting upon this. And just for education, academic purposes, I think we should probably subtract the P and the E from hope and add an A and an X. Because as this bill is currently reading, it is the hoax scholarship. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 32nd, Doug Fast, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill. Let us keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen. It is the jurisdiction of parents to educate their children, not the state. It is the jurisdiction of parents. Parents are taxpayers, and currently they pay the full array of taxes, whether it's income taxes, property taxes, other taxes that go towards public education. They pay it all from A to Z. And if they decide to send their child to a private school, they pay the full array of tuition right now to do that. And they still pay the full array of taxes. This is not a diversion from public education. It gives education choice to the taxpayers for use of their taxpayer dollars. Public funds are not taxpayer funds. I'm sorry, public funds are taxpayer funds. Public funds are taxpayer funds. It is not a subsidy, it creates a choice. And for those reasons, I would strongly urge passage of this bill. It recognizes the jurisdiction of parents, it creates education choice, and keep in mind, whose money is it? It's the taxpayers' money we're talking about. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman to 36, Doug Barrick.
on. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I address the bill?
Gentleman is recognized.
All right. Thank you for recognizing me to speak to this body for the first time as a freshman delegate. I'm very, very excited and honored to be here. The reason I want to talk to everyone about this is because of the fact that I'm very passionate about education. I ran on an education platform, as I know every single one of you did. Every one of you put it on your literature that you are for education. And we're talking public education. And we need to have a strong public education system here. That's the way I was raised. And I see this as a war against public education that we have going on here in the past few years. First going after the teachers, then bringing in the charter schools, and now the ESAs. All of these chipping away at public education, and that's a great concern to me. We're in the third decade of the 21st century, and we're trying to move the state forward, and what I see is that we're moving back. We're moving back 70 years to 1954 in Kansas. It's before before I was born. Many of you, this happened in your lifetime, but we remember Brown versus Board of Education. And what this was about is that back in the 50s, in areas like Kansas and many states, we had open segregation. And we had the white schools and the so-called colored schools, and they said, well, we just want to keep the races separate, but we'll make everything equal, don't worry about it. Well, the minorities said, no, that's not quite right. They took it to the Supreme Court, and the Warren Court, despite having a split court, voted 9-0 to and came up with the ruling that separate is inherently unequal. And that's what I see us moving towards. This is an end around Brown versus Board of Education, that we're creating a two-tiered system of education where the have-somes and the have-mores get to go to private schools, and everyone else goes to the underfunded public schools. And we're going to end up with a lot of people ending up on the short end of the stick, and it's done in a sort of a sneaky way. It's done in a very legal way. I remember when I was young, I remember people talking about saying, well, you know, why should people who don't have kids pay for public schools? And I asked my mom about that. I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, because, and my mother, a very staunch Republican, by the way, and and my dad too, and she said, well, because it behooves everyone to have a strong public school system. Why do people move to an area? What's the first thing they ask about? How are the schools here? It's a backbone of a community. It attracts people. It brings in people, keeps property values up. You have good schools, people want to move there. And we all talk about economic diversification, bringing in jobs. We've all said that too. That's all a big part of our campaign when we all got elected or reelected in 2020. And that's one way to bring in businesses. Businesses are going to look at this area and say, hey, your public schools are dropping. They're not doing as well. We don't want to come there. And so that's a big concern to me as well. There's a lot riding on all this. My colleague here from the 19th district a couple days ago said, he pointed out that everything he has is at least in part due to a good public education, and that's the way I feel as well. My daughter went to a parochial school, my wife insisted, but when she got to middle school and high school, she went back to public school, and now she's ready to graduate Marshall on the Promise Scholarship, thank you very much, but she got a very good education, and I think all kids need to have that same opportunity. And so I don't like this idea of having substandard public schools and giving people the chance to get out. And just because you get these Hope scholarships, which by the way is going to stand for I hope I don't get stuck in the public education system. If you get one of these scholarships and you go to try to get to a private school, it doesn't mean they have to accept you. They might say you don't fit our, what we're looking for, which they can use if you're not the way they want you to look, or the way they want you to act. It's called a cream skimming. And so that means they're going to be picking out the top kids out of the public schools, and that's going to just even further make a separation for us. And we don't want that. We want to have equality. That's what we're all about. We're supposed to be providing everyone with a good possibility, a good chance of an education, no matter what your background is from. Of course, the rich people can always put their kids through private school. That's not a problem. But everyone else should have the same opportunity, and it just makes for a much better community. And I'm really worried that that the only ones who are really going to be celebrating this bill, should it pass, are the people in Mississippi who are going to be saying, thank you for not making us number 50 anymore. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from the 51st, Leggett Walker, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Vice Chair of Education please yield?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So my colleague from District 1 brought up some concerns, and you said that you would list the items that would be covered for the Hope Scholarship Program.
Sure.
Can you please list those items?
I can, yes. So those items are ongoing services provided by a public school district pursuant to the statute, tuition or fees at a participating school, tutoring services, fees for a nationally standardized assessment, AP exam, tuition or fees for study of the curriculum of courses that lead to an industry-recognized credential, non-public online learning program tuition, tuition for alternative education programs, fees for after-school or summer education programs, educational services and therapies, including but not limited to occupational, behavioral, physical, speech, language, and audiology therapies, as well as fees for transportation paid to a fee-for-service transportation provider.
Is assistive technology included in this bill for students with assistive technology? Is that included in this bill for students with disabilities? Nope.
Well, it does say that other qualified expenses as approved by the board can be included, but I would say that that would probably be included under educational services for therapies or, for kids with special needs.
Can you give me some examples of assistive technology that we now use in public education?
I cannot offhand, no.
Does council know of any items that she can tell you that we use in the public education system for assistive technology for students with disabilities?
Are you referring to such as a hearing aid for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing?
No, that's not considered assistive technology in our public education system.
Then I'm not certain what you're referring to, no.
So assistive technology in the public education system is items that a student needs in order for them to be successful in the classroom. The reason why I know is because I have a child with a disability too, one with the IEP, one with the 504, and let's make this clear, I am a homeschool parent, proud. So assistive technology can be a timer that is red, yellow, and green, and is based on time. I see nothing in this bill that's covering that for these students. A therapy service is not assistive technology, but I'll go on. On number 3, on the items that you spoke about, tutoring services provided by an individual or a tutoring facility, that such tutoring services are not provided by a member of the Hope Scholarship student's immediate family. Do you see that as being a barrier for a student with a disability?
Well, a student can certainly be homeschooled by the parent and still utilize the Hope Scholarship. The intent of that language is to state that the parent could not then be paid a salary or a stipend in order to do that, nor can they be reimbursed for expenses that they have incurred.
So if that parent is a certified educator, or that parent is educated, and the reason why that parent used a choice to remove their child from public education so that child can be comfortable, we're now going to bring an extra person because that parent can offer tutoring to their child. And as a parent, I'm going to always do what I need to do, what I must do, what I desire to do. But because I live in the house with my child and I choose our home and not a nursing home or a mental facility, I would not be compensated for that. I see that as being discriminatory. But let's go to page number 21, line 10. When we speak about students with disabilities, and we speak about the education service providers, will those providers be inclusive to all students? Will those providers be able to have assistive technology for those students?
Well, code currently, in other sections of code, it does require that these students be provided for regardless of their disability, so they can't be turned away by these education service providers. That is part of the approval process that they would have to go through in order to become a qualified, approved education service provider.
Well, I'm really concerned because many folks in this body don't even know what assistive technology is, so I hope we do our due diligence to make sure that those education service providers do. When we define parents, can you please tell me the definition that we have in this bill when we talk about parents?
One moment.
Yes, sir, take your time.
A parent, word for word, means a biological parent, legal guardian, custodian, or other person with legal authority to act on behalf of an eligible recipient or Hope Scholarship student.
So we went back and forth in here, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, about grand families. We are fighting an epidemic in this state. And it's not all the time when that child is removed from a home that a grandparent or someone in that family is not caring for that child. So are you telling me that those individuals who have not went through the court system yet, or if DHHR is behind, will not be included to get these funds?
Well, if they are the custodian of the child, then yes, they would qualify for it.
But that takes time for that to get through that process, as we vetted the foster care child and parent bill. So does that mean that those persons will not be allowable to have this Hope Scholarship program until they go through the court system?
It does say, or other person with the legal authority to act on behalf of them. So if a parent or legal guardian is incapacitated or imprisoned or can't be found, then whoever the next of kin would then have the legal authority over the student.
So let's talk about page number 22, line 20. We discussed the use of debit cards. Do we have a fiscal note of how those debit cards will be set up?
Did you say a fiscal note?
Yeah, because I mean, we got to pay for the debit card itself, and we'll have to pay for the program that we're going to use for those debit cards, correct?
So the Treasurer's Office will be taking a fee of up to, I believe, 5% of the total amount. They have assured us that it probably will not be that high. It'll be probably up to 3% to administer the fund. So that 3% would be the administrative costs of the auditing, as well as, I'm assuming, the procurement of these debit cards.
Now, I do like that we have that option of having a debit card in here, because not all persons have a bank account if we want equity in this bill.
Correct.
So will we have a fee every time a person has to use that debit card? Will they be charged a fee?
I don't believe that the bill stipulates something like that, but something like that would be up to the Treasurer's Office to promulgate in the rules, but I really don't see why why they would do that, as they already would be collecting an administrative fee from the school aid formula.
So I'm going to bring it back to the children. We have a disgusting situation here in our state, unforeseen by many of us, with foster care children. I've had the calls at 3 a.m. in the morning saying that a child is coming, being placed in my home. Child don't have shoes, clothes, there's no records. How would that foster care parent receive this debit card that's going to follow this child that was just removed from their biological parents. Do we have anything in this bill that's going to set that provision?
Well, that's something to be set out in the rules, and I also don't believe that foster care kids can be homeschooled anyways. I don't think that they can.
But they can go to private school.
I believe so.
So they
Yes.
could apply for this Hope Scholarship.
Yes, yes.
And so, great point. You said that you don't think that foster care students can be homeschooled. So if they were homeschooled with their biological parents, and they're removed from that biological home, what happens to that Hope Scholarship program? Because don't seem like we're sure.
I mean, that's a very specific scenario. I would assume something would be taken care of in the rulemaking process, or a special exemption would be provided by the board of the Hope Scholarship.
I appreciate you answering my questions. May I speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, the lady is recognized.
This is hard. You've heard many of your colleagues sitting on the side of you take a stand, whether they support or whether they oppose this bill. There is a lot of unanswered questions in this bill. Now, whether you want to accept it or not, there's a lot of discrimination in this bill because we don't know the answers. And we're going to depend on someone else to make the rules. It's heartbreaking because when the Fair Share Network comes into the people's house and we do that ice cream social, each and every one of us go out there and we take a picture with them. We put a smile on those persons' faces. We even have some of them to come and sit with us on the floor and take a picture. And we don't even know what they need for their free and public education. You sit in this body and you tell me you don't know what assistive technology is. Have you ever been in a classroom? A special needs classroom? Do you answer the emails from the parents? Do you try to communicate with those persons? I take this personal, not for myself, but for the constituents who always seem like they don't have a voice. I oppose this bill heavy-hearted because every mountaineer should have equality and equity, and this bill is lacking this. I get the effort, but the way that I was raised, very strict. I don't know it's not good enough for the students of West Virginia. You want to attack the educators? Do so. But when you attack the future leaders of this state, who are you really hurting? We pray in this body every day. And we pass more judgment in every piece of legislation. And I get it, we all don't see through the same lenses. But I ask of one thing: listen to hear and not to respond. Vote red on this bill so we can have equity in our state.
The gentleman from the 26, Douglas Evans, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my friend from the 13th yield for another question?
For my friend, yes.
Thank you, sir. I just want to be clear. Monies that are taken from the local school board's funds, they are not replaced by the state. Is that correct?
That would be correct. These are funds from the state allocated for education. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Speak to the bill.
Gentleman is recognized.
I mentioned the other day that I spoke with my president of the Board of Education, and I apologize to my other friends that I had to give a phone number to him for that represent McDowell County. But he's rather upset over the fact that money taken out of there is going to be critical to him. Currently, those funds that we're about to remove pay for teachers. Katherine Johnson was on TV the other day, the Hidden Figures movie. I was watching it, and she said, "Trust the math." So let me give you a little math. $4,600, I believe, is the amount per child. For every 7 students, that adds up to $32,200. That's a teacher. Just lost a teacher. And the local system can't pay for it. Currently, McDowell County is, and you should check with your systems and see where they're at. They are currently 11 professional positions over formula. We didn't adjust the formula. They are 30 positions over on service personnel. Now, for those who don't understand that, county funds have to pay for those positions because the state does not. So we're going to add to the burden of those county systems, your county systems and mine, by removing 7 students. We take out 1 teacher. Now you say, 1 teacher, okay. Well, hang on. If that's a high school teacher, how many students does that affect? I taught for 35 years. Every day I had 5 classes, maybe 6, of about 30 students. Let's trust the math again. How many students, if you can do the math in your head there very quickly, does losing that 1 high school teacher affect? At the expense of 7 students that we give funds to go to private school to pay for their tuition? You're going to potentially remove enough funds from a local LEA to seriously cripple their ability to provide a thorough and efficient public education as described by the Constitution. Each of us put up our hand and we said we'll defend that Constitution. That's not defending it, that's grabbing it and tearing it in half. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't possibly support this bill. Katherine Johnson said trust the math. I'm asking you to trust Katherine Johnson, who was educated in West Virginia, right? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be voting against this bill.
The gentleman from the 13th, Doug Higginbotham, to close debate on the bill.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, I think, has had a lot of things said about it over the last hour or so. What it does is it provides choices and opportunity for people who otherwise would not have the chance to be homeschooled or private schooled. 6 years ago, I graduated from Polka High School in Putnam County, 6 years ago. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't attend public school. I love public school. I love the teachers that I had. And I can assure you the Education Committee has plenty of bills to try to fix our public education system as well. But we have to give opportunity for people who can't afford to attend a private school or to be homeschooled. And that is exactly what this bill does. That's why it's the Hope Scholarship. Mr. Speaker, I encourage passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine.
The following have paired in accordance with House Rule 43. Delegate Ellington, yea. Delegate Kelly, nay. Delegate J. Kelly, nay.
Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 60 ayes, 39 nays, and 1 member absent not voting. Majority of members voting in the affirmative. The chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2013 relating to the Hope Scholarship Program.
Are there amendments to the title?
Delegates Ellington and Higginbotham move to amend the title.
Question before the House is the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of the title amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title of the bill will be as amended by the House. Clerk will please report the action of the House or the Senate, request concurrence therein. Are there further bills on third reading? If not, bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2003 relating to the authority and obligations of the governor and legislature when in declared states of preparedness and emergency.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Brown moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Brown 2-18.
Does the gentleman wish to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read? Are there objections? There are no objections.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to put an amendment to a bill that came through Judiciary. I'll note, or I'll state by starting off, that this amendment is not directed particularly at this governor or any governor. I don't know who the governor will be in 20 years. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you what this is. This is simply an amendment that defines the term house of worship, and you'll find it on the delegate console system. And it further goes on to say that the emergency powers granted in the section we're discussing today do not authorize the governor to close or dictate any religious practice in a house of worship during a state of preparedness or a state of emergency. So I'm simply asking you all to vote today on an amendment to this legislation that would make it clear, at least to me, that during a state of emergency or state of preparedness can't be used to close or dictate what goes on in our houses of worship. I believe there should be a clear separation of church and state. This is evenly applied to all houses of worship. You can read how it's defined. This came to my attention as I watched neighboring states of Kentucky, and we've seen what went on in New York. And, you know, I'm just asking you to give consideration to this and some real thought. I'd reserve the right to close and ask for the yeas and nays, Speaker.
Is there discussion on the amendment? The gentleman of the 25th, Delegate Capito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from the 20th yield for a couple?
Sir?
Gentleman does yield.
I think I understand the amendment, and we did work it, and I appreciate the gentleman's cooperation in bringing it to the floor. Would the amendment preclude, because I'm reading the bill here, would the amendment preclude the legislature from restricting houses of worship?
Well, the First Amendment to our Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion prohibiting free exercise thereof. In my mind, a state of emergency or state of preparedness is not a law. I just want to erase any gray area that may be there for future governors or legislatures.
No, I understand. Let me clarify. So on page 5 of the bill, line 29, it provides that in this new language that the legislature in states of preparedness may, quote, condition, limit, terminate, or expand any action or directive of the governor. So if the governor didn't expressly close a house of worship, could this body come in, assuming that this law is put into place, could the legislature then come over top of the governor? I don't know why they would, but if they did, would the governor have to comply with the will of the legislature if the legislature were to expand that order? I'm just looking for your interpretation.
Yeah, no, my interpretation, just based on your hypothetical, I mean, I think routinely the governor complies with the will of this body and the Senate and laws that we pass. I'm not really following what you're trying to ask.
Well, I'm just wondering about the enforceability of it. If the legislature put the governor in a position to where he couldn't carry out the product before, that's fine. I think you've answered my questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the amendment?
Gentleman is recognized.
I speak to the amendment to say that I think this is a policy question for every member of this body to make. I don't think that the gentleman's amendment does necessarily any harm to the bill at all. It certainly affects the scope of the amendment in situations where especially there would be, states of preparedness when communities were, for instance, anticipating a flood. This is going to impact situations like that. But again, I would say the amendment does no necessary harm to the bill. It does change the scope. So I would suggest that each member of this body make a policy decision.
The gentleman of the 13th, Douglas Penson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the amendment. And I'd like to thank my colleague for being willing to bring the amendment to the floor. Given the time frame that we had the opportunity to work the bill in committee, this amendment would have most likely been worked out in committee. And I'll speak on behalf of myself. I believe that the amendment does strengthen the bill overall. And again, I would agree with my colleague that the amendment in no way is directed specifically at our current governor, but I do believe that it is a safety net built into the bill that would strengthen the bill overall. I support the amendment.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the amendment? If not, does the gentleman wish to close debate on the amendment?
Please, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be real brief. Bear in mind that this legislature, its ability to restrict future legislatures from doing something is very limited. I mean, if a future legislature doesn't like this, they can come in and undo it. I'm just giving us an opportunity while this section of the law is open and we're considering amendments and powers the governor to make a vote on this amendment. And again, I'd ask for the ayes and nays.
The debate on the amendment is closed. A roll call vote on the amendment has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. The question before the House is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 94 ayes, 4 nays, and 2 members absent not voting. A majority having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments?
Delegate McGeehan moves to amend the bill. This is HFA McGeehan 2-18, number 1.
Are there objections to having the amendment explained in lieu of having it read? There are not. Does the gentleman wish to explain the amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this was an amendment I offered in the Judiciary Committee this past Friday, which passed, I believe it was 16-9. And then, 1 day later, or 2 days later, it was essentially rescinded and taken out. So the amendment is one sentence, and I don't have it in front of me, but from the top of my memory, the amendment reads, upon passage, any current state of emergency or state of preparedness are subject to the provisions of this section. And so, the concept of the bill is to limit the duration of a state of emergency without legislative approval for an extension. And so what my amendment does is make it clear that this executive powers check bill applies to the current state of emergency. So if my amendment, my one sentence amendment were to pass, then upon passage, essentially the clock would start ticking at 60 days at the 60-day mark. So 60 days from after it takes passage, either the state of emergency we've been operating under for the last 11 months would expire, or we would be called in to authorize an extension. So that's my amendment. I ask for the yeas and nays, and I reserve the right to close.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. The gentleman from the 35th, Delegate Capito, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of the gentleman's amendment. I don't rise in opposition to the intent of the amendment, and I don't think anybody, or I would challenge maybe most of us probably do agree with the intent of the gentleman's amendment. What I take issue with is the effect of the amendment. This body came together months ago and began a process of analyzing the emergency powers in this state. This body spoke very clearly, unlike our sister body, that we had issues with how the current state of emergency and state of preparedness was being handled in West Virginia. And so a committee got together and crafted a piece of legislation that addressed those very concerns. Careful deliberation, draft after draft, closely scrutinized wording of a bill. That's what this body's all about. It's not about rushing things through. It's about careful deliberation to ensure that what we pass in this body has the effect of law. And as I said, this body spoke loudly, and we reacted. And we brought a piece of legislation that's before you right now that I think cures those concerns. My reading of the bill is rather unambiguous. Without this amendment, which I don't believe is needed, I think the bill as written applies to a current situation. Nothing in this bill precludes application of the law to any existing state of emergency or state of preparedness. And as I said, we take careful deliberation, we carefully construct amendments and law because my preference is to craft policy that makes an impact, not policy that proves a point. What we'll learn is when you insert emotion into the policy-making process, we get sloppy sometimes. And when we get sloppy, not that we ever get sloppy, but when we do, we bring our friends over in the East Wing in to tell us what we did down here. And I'm a firm believer, as we passed a constitutional amendment out earlier last week, in the separation of powers. I believe that this body has the ability to make laws. But when laws become cloudy, they need interpretation. And our friends that wear the black robes interpret those. And we know, I know, some of you may know if you've been in the court of law or if you practice in a court of law, that deliberative process is very slow. So it's my preference to see this piece of legislation find a home in our code and not to find a home in our courts. Statutory rules of statutory interpretation tell us that the courts are to take the plain reading of the language. The plain reading of the language. And I'm going to read to you, it might prove that the gentleman didn't have his amendment, but I have it, and I've read it many times. And it reads as follows at the end of the bill. Upon passage, any state of emergency or state of preparedness currently in effect are subject to the provisions of this section. I don't know what passage means. I don't know what passage means. Does it mean passage from this body? Does it mean passage from that body? Does it mean when it's signed by the governor? Sounds like a question that needs some interpretation. And here we are extending the time period again. Again, I'd like to see this become law. I don't want to see it tied up in the court. We saw a piece of legislation that was passed in 2015 just get out of the courts last year. And as I go back, I think it's unambiguous that it would apply to the current situation. So what is passage? So, if you take the position that the legislation before you is not clear and you need a belt and suspender approach to legislation, which I wouldn't recommend, because then we're just going to throw everything in the wall and see what sticks. If you need the belt and suspender approach, and you believe that this law as written does not apply to the current state of affairs, if you believe that, well, then what I can tell you is this law certainly wouldn't apply to any state of emergency or any state of preparedness between the time of passage and the time of effectiveness. That's clear, because this says passage. But it doesn't become law until it becomes effective. So what about if the governor declares a state of emergency, I don't know, after passage, but before effectiveness? Can't do anything about it, because now we've clouded the whole bill. We've confused the purpose of the bill. So now we got to go to the courts. We got to get them to interpret it. Yeah, they might agree with us. They might go along with us. They might. But how long do you want to wait? How long do you want to wait? My suggestion to you is that we reject the amendment. We keep this bill clear. It is unambiguous. And I would strongly encourage rejection of the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman from the 47th, Delegate Phillips.
Speaker, permission to speak to the amendment?
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I was part of that bipartisan working group that crafted this legislation over the summer, and we did a lot of work on it. We very carefully looked at it, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't binding the hands of the governor unduly for any emergency situation that might arise currently or might arise in the future. But it was very clear from the beginning that this current state of emergency was addressed in that was what brought about the work group. That's what brought about a majority of this body last year to vote to bring ourselves back into session. It wasn't to address some future emergency, it was to address this one. And currently, we're almost a year into this emergency, so the situation is no longer emergent. And I think that this body has every right as a co-equal branch of government to make our voice heard and exercise our status as a co-equal branch, and I support the amendment. Thank you.
Lady in the 51st, Delegate Fleischauer is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was also part of that very small group. And I don't see, I'm a lawyer, I don't see any reason not to clarify that we intended, those of us who worked on that and those of us who are in this body, that we intend it to apply to this current situation. Like you said, it's been a year. And I feel very strongly that separation of powers is critically important. And it has been ignored for a very, very long time. And it ignores the importance of our branch of the legislature. A lot of people say our function is to appropriate, but our function is also to set policy. And I don't think it harms anything at all to say that this law applies right now. And I disagree, we can all disagree about legal issues, but I think what upon passage is pretty clear, that we want this law to apply to the current situation and to future situations that we defined very, very carefully. We spent a lot of time, those of us who were on that committee, it wasn't interim, so we weren't reimbursed. We were here and we worked on that bill because we care about that issue. So I urge adoption of the amendment, and I appreciate the gentleman for offering it to make sure that it's clear.
The gentleman, the 18th, Delegate Worrell, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Chair of Judiciary yield for a couple questions?
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. I'm not on Judiciary, so I'm just asking. I heard the gentleman say that this amendment passed in your committee previously. Can you explain to the other members who are on Judiciary what happened with the amendment?
It passed.
It did pass, and then how is it not in the bill now?
Because there was reconsideration, it was pulled out.
Okay, I'm just asking because you know way more than I do about this issue. So you spoke about the courts and how the courts would interpret things. Is it possible that the governor's office might take into account that there was an amendment passed stating that it was for this current state of emergency and then was taken out of the bill? Could they use that as an argument to the courts that we did not intend for this legislation to count for this state of emergency?
No, that's speculative, I think, at best. But I think again, I think the amendment kind of clouds the timing and the applicability of the bill, frankly.
Okay. And I'm a sponsor on this bill, so I want to make sure it's clear. I want to make sure I'm very clear as someone who wanted to be a sponsor that we do, in fact, take care of this current state of emergency. So that's why I'm asking these questions. But that is one of my fears with the governor's office. If they were to take this to the courts, that they would be able to use the fact that this was a pass in committee and then was taken back and reconsidered and taken out. But I do appreciate you answering my question, sir. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 17th, Delegate Lovejoy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. About to fall over here. It's often said that we should practice principles above personalities. And I want to make clear that my review of the amendment and of the issue before us has nothing to do with the personalities. It has nothing to do with the governor. Much of what he has done, we should be very proud of as a state. It has nothing to do with the gentleman that offered the amendment. I don't believe that it's offered out of emotion. I don't believe it's offered out of anything other than his belief that it should be made clear that it is the policy of this body that this law applies to the current state of emergency. My colleague touched on the issue of separation of powers. It's something I've spoke on several times over the last few years, and I think it's very, very important. It's very important to this body who has one of those three branches. It comes from the framers' experience with a monarchy where you had all three powers concentrated in one person. So they came over and said, we're going to separate those powers out. We're going to have a legislative body. They'll make the laws. We're going to have an executive branch that'll enforce the laws. And we'll have a judicial branch that will interpret the laws that are in need of interpretation. I submit that it is a very important function of our body to assert clearly what our roles are. We are the body that makes the laws. We are the body that appropriates the money. We have the power of the purse. That's the object of a separate bill. So we've now been in a state of emergency for 11 months. We've all that have been in since back in March received phone calls, emails, visits from citizens. They had questions about certain powers, whether it was to their business, to their church, to their family, to their rights. We've had to say, well, I'm sorry, we're not in session, because the timing of this couldn't have been worse. 5-6 days after we gavelled out on that Saturday night, the state of emergency began. So about July, many of us, and I applaud those in this body that did, filed petitions to call ourselves back into session under the Constitution, as is our duty and right. This body stood together, and unfortunately, down the hall, we couldn't get 3/5, so we were unable to call ourselves in. So we said, well, we'll be back in February, almost a year later. Well, here we are. This bill is good product by those that contributed. It does redefine the extent of executive authority, and it reasserts the role of the legislature. But it is not clear whether it applies to this current state of emergency. Those were the questions that were asked in Judiciary. I think so, probably, maybe. I believe it's cloudy. So the gentleman made an amendment to say, if we want it to apply to this state of emergency, then let's say so. Say what you mean what you say. He made the amendment passed. Through whatever procedural situation, the amendment is gone, and he makes it here today. I think that with all due respect to my good friend, the chair, we are leaving it cloudy. We don't need to leave it cloudy. We can say what we mean. If you mean this bill to apply to this state of emergency, adopt his amendment and say so. If you believe it's better policy to leave it cloudy, to leave it to our friends in black robes, as my friend said, then vote against it. But as for me, I'm going to reassert those separation of powers, and I'm going to say that the legislature can and should make the law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 36th, Doug Pritt, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I speak to the amendment?
The gentleman is recognized.
Many of us in here ran on the idea of placing reasonable limits on government. And what we're talking about here with this amendment is balancing the powers between the executive and the legislative branch of government. I personally consider myself, like many of you, to be a constitutional conservative. And what that means to me is that we have a role in restoring our rightful place in allocating the powers between the executive branch of government and the legislative branch of government. I do believe that there's always a chance that something could be brought up in court. Some sort of claim could be always filed in a court of law for the judiciary to attempt to interpret it. But at the same time, I think it's very, very important that we make a statement that we are a co-equal branch of government and that we have a proper place and we have a say and should have a say in this. I believe the amendment from the delegate from the first was an appropriate one. It's an amendment that would assert our proper role, and I support this amendment.
The gentleman from the 25th, Doug Painter, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would clarify, and as we know, lawyers love ambiguity, and when we have ambiguity, it goes to the court. And has anybody seen the court rule on our side in the last year? We're a constitutional republic here, not a monarchy. We don't hide under our desk and send stuff out of here and hope, oh, maybe the Senate will fix it, maybe the court will uphold it. No, it should go out of here right. It should go out of here clear. It should go out of here concisely, so they know exactly what they're getting, and it don't end up upstairs at the mercy of the court. The people sent us here to represent them, not to represent people down the hall or downstairs. How many of you guys campaigned on controlling the governor and getting this, what is it now, almost a year state of emergency under control? We have had zero, well, I'm sure somebody's had input on it in here, but 90% of us have had zero input since this whole thing started. And it's pretty hard to sit and tell your constituents that, well, there's nothing I can do. Well, what do we elect you for? Yeah, when this is the case, that's a good question. What did they elect us for? Because we have no input, so we can either roll by edict here, or we can do our jobs as a constitutional republic and pass a law that is clear, and this amendment makes it clear. So yeah, I support my brother from the First Amendment, and I suggest you do too. And that way we'll let the people know once again that, yeah, they do have a voice here, because they damn sure ain't for the last year. And let's pass this. Thank you.
The lady from the 35th, Doug Young, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman from the first yield?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. If this amendment passed, would the legislature get control of the $660,774,770 that are still in the COVID fund?
I think that's a separate bill. If this bill were to pass with my amendment, after passage and it becoming law, the 60-day clock would then start to tick. And so we would either have to authorize an extension if the governor called us back in. Presumably we could do it before we left town, or the state of emergency would end. So I think the monetary public treasury question you have there has to do with something else. But you know, we could obviously, in a if we were to authorize an extension to the state of emergency, we could put prescriptive language within that authorization that says, okay, an extension to that state of emergency is approved by the legislative branch, but there are certain parameters that you have to stay within. So, for instance, your question about is that the CARES funding you're talking about?
Yeah.
We could put something in there that said you have to receive approval from the legislative branch, or you have to provide financial documents on where that money's at, so often. And so there's a lot of things you can do with a resolution to authorize an extension to a state of emergency. But the key here is to ensure that it applies to the current state of emergency that has gone on for far too long. So,
thank you. I support the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 29th, Doug Steele, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's hardly anybody in here that wasn't more frustrated with the last year of dealing with the current situation you're in. I started writing letters back in March. First few I threw away, because that's what was that Abraham Lincoln that said that? Write the letter that you're mad about, put it in your desk, 2 days later throw it away. I quit throwing them away after a while, and I didn't care. I didn't care at all. And you know, when I heard about this project to do the emergency powers bill, I think there's probably about 100 people in here wanting on that committee, right? I don't think there's anybody in here that didn't want on that committee. I was the last guy you wanted on that committee. You know, I didn't make any secret of it. I said what we should do is just run a constitutional amendment to become a parliamentary republic. You know, we just elect the speaker, governor, and that's how I would have done it. I was far too emotional about this because, like some of you guys in here, Pat, there ain't nobody in here that's got more of a lion heart than you do. And you absolutely do 100% care for this state. And you care about the people here, and you care about freedom. I think everybody in here does. Nobody's more principled about it than my friend from the first. And I am thankful I get to call him my friend, because it's an honor to work with him and him be a colleague. I was far too emotional about this topic to be on that committee. I couldn't do it. No way, no how. And those of you that were on that committee, I thank you for the work you did, and I thank you for coming up with a great product. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at on this amendment. Without thinking about it, I could easily just hit a green button and be like, yep, applies right now. And I started thinking, I cannot think of us ever having this debate before on any bill ever. Of did it apply to a current situation? If we wrote a bill that said a dog must be put into a kennel for 1 month if it bites a dandelion, when would it apply? Well, it would apply as soon as it became effective, right? I can't think of a single bill on a single situation. Maybe it's an appropriation bill that says rather than the Department of Personnel being able to spend $20 million a month, they're only allowed to spend $15 million a month. When does that become effective? When the bill becomes effective. By putting this language in here, the chairman has a point. Just go, wait a minute, we got a product that everybody sat down for a year and figured out this is 100% going to work. Does it create my parliamentary republic that puts the gentleman from the 34th in charge? No, it doesn't do that. But it achieves what the rest of you have said was important today when you stood up and talked about this, about your constituents saying, when are you going to get this thing under control? This bill does it. And I think there is a point, and I without thinking, I would absolutely vote with the gentleman from the first. My fear is the chairman's right. I know of no other bill that we've ever done this with, and the arguments in favor, I think are coming from the right place. But at the same time, myself, knowing how I feel about this situation, the only thing cloudy is my eyes, and they're clouded with anger over the last year about a lot of things. We've got to set that down and realize we have a viable product going across the hall, Doesn't end here, doesn't become effective here. It's got to get it across the hall, and then potentially we've all got to come back and reauthorize it again. And I want to see us come out of here with something that we did the job for the folks that wanted us to do it at home. And if we're putting something in here that even has the potential of disrupting that, I don't want to do it. Because I think we got a good bill here. I didn't work on it. I'm not on Judiciary anymore. I don't have a single hand on that other than I'm going to vote green tomorrow. But I don't want to do anything that's going to mess that up. Folks, I'm as principled as the rest of you. I wrote all them letters. I've done FOIA requests. I've done everything I can to make somebody that lives in that house across the way maybe mad in the last year. But that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to make a political point. I'm here to make policy for folks at home, just like the chairman said. And for that reason, as much as I agree with the spirit of everything everybody said in here, I think we need to vote against it. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 50th, Garcia, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make 2 points. Number one, I want to remind this body, one of the state's greatest deliberative bodies, that we are on day 9 of the legislative session. This is not a race. What we should be focused on with every piece of legislation is getting it right. And I've heard several people today, several members talk about also, especially with this amendment, there's no need to send this over on a rocket ship to the Senate and let them fix mistakes that we can correct right now. The second point that I'd like to make is that there is a process in our rules. If someone disagrees with the gentleman from the First Amendment and says that it's not clear enough, we would be able to amend the amendment, to reform the amendment, to discuss the amendment, to make sure it is exactly as clear as it needs to be. With that being said, I believe the amendment is clear. I believe the amendment is not made out of malice. I believe the amendment is to make sure that what every member has been talking about for the last year and the purpose of this bill is fulfilled. And I urge you to adopt the amendment.
The gentleman from the First Delegate McGinn to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to read to you the definition that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee says is so ambiguous. Passage of bill. This is from the glossary of our manual. The act of passing a bill into law by either or by both houses of the legislature. So, if you're wondering what passage meant, that's what it means. Essentially, when it becomes law. Not sure how one sentence could make a bill unambiguous or more ambiguous. I've had several different attorneys in this House. Some are elected members. Some are elected members in leadership positions who have told me on one day that they don't think the bill applies to the current state of emergency. Then days later, they say, oh yes, I think it does apply to the current state of emergency. So I'm not insinuating that there's any lying or anything like going on or deception. I'm just trying to point out a fact that there definitely is a lot of ambiguity. If some of our smartest members in here and smartest attorneys in here can't determine exactly what the fact is, if this bill were to pass in a law without this one sentence amendment, if it applies to the current state of emergency. And that's sort of a travesty. And I think I'm sort of taken aback by the chairman's argument, because when I first offered this amendment and spoke with him, he never brought that up. The amendment was written right in front of him, and he never said, I don't understand what passage means. Now all of a sudden we got a diatribe that says my one sentence amendment is unclear and cloudies the bill. That doesn't make any sense. It's sort of unsound. We've had one-man rule in this state for 11 months now. One-man rule. Could anybody even possibly predict that prior to March of last year? One man who is able to essentially assume the law himself, spend all sorts of money out of the public treasury without any authorization from us. We've been reduced to a social club. This bill here shouldn't be so controversial. I'm simply asking us as a legislative body to come together and reclaim our constitutional authority to provide some sort of meaningful check against what's going on right now. Because if we don't do that, we're essentially implying that everything that's gone on over the last 11 months was acceptable legally. And we set a very dangerous precedent going forward. Now, I happen to like the governor. I have my days, but I happen to like the guy. I don't see any fault with his personality. You know, but I mean, from the days of Cato the Younger, Republican governments has always opposed one-man rule for a reason. And when we're now faced, I mean, I've heard members on this floor in the past, I mean, some of them are no longer here, literally decry the words tyranny against things that amount to no more than new regulations over lemonade stands. And now we're faced with essentially what you would call, you know, a soft sort of dictatorship, or maybe that's not the right word to use. And where are our voices? You know, we're just sort of more relaxed about it. This should be, you know, we should be a lot more passionate about what's going on and rectifying this situation right now. You know, and so that is problematic and troublesome to me, because this is probably the largest infringement and deterioration of just the very fundamentals of the American way of government that we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And we just can't allow, we can't just make exceptions to people that we like. Just imagine for a second if the governor was not a Republican and he was a Democrat. Would we truly act the same way? Because I care a lot more about ideas than personalities and political parties, and that's what really should matter. We should try to finally put aside the differences between Republicans and Democrats and come together as a legislative branch to reclaim and reassert proper checks and balances to this system. And this is a very reasonable amendment. All it says is that this state of emergency that the governor's office now is deriving all of these extraordinary powers from over the last 11 months must be checked by the legislative branch. That's all the amendment says. It makes it clear. That's all it does. You know, think about the extraordinary powers that have been claimed by the executive branch. I mean, to my knowledge, there has been no limits conceded by the executive branch to their political power yet. And that's a dangerous thing. Now, I mean, there hasn't been draconian measures taken vis-a-vis other different states, like say in Michigan, but there's been no concessions to the limits of these powers. There's been, as far as I know, no talk of when this state of emergency will end. If we don't apply this check to executive power now, then it's at the executive branch's discretion as to when it's going to end and what they can do. And we'll continue to have no input. You know, it's just, I firmly believe that some people in the legislative branch desire this bill to be precisely ambiguous and unclear, because lawyers can then argue that it doesn't apply to the current state of emergency. And you have a strong, it's going to be a difficult time trying to enforce this law when it becomes, if it were to become law anyway, precisely because it doesn't have this amendment and it's been taken out once already. It's pretty easy to go to court and defend the executive branch by saying, well, obviously legislative intent was it doesn't apply because they removed the language. So, yeah, after this one ends, I don't know, maybe in 2024, maybe next year, then it may apply. So, I understand many people have made up their minds, and I don't want to belabor the point. But very few people can actually resist the immense temptations from wielding the level of concentrated power which now exists under this dome in the executive branch. I mean, unless you're one of the ideal forms of Plato's philosopher king, or you're some sort of Marcus Aurelius or George Washington, some sort of unique brand of person who abdicates all this power. Lord Acton's quote, "Power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely," typically applies to human nature, and that's exactly why this amendment is needed. To check human nature, which always is very tempted to not only accumulate more political power, but wield it, and sometimes not in the best ways. So with that, I'll close. I appreciate your time, and I ask for the yeas and nays. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A roll call vote on the amendment was demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. The question before the House is the amendment as explained by the gentleman from the first. Those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Gentleman from the 9th, Delegate Kimes, your vote is not registered. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there are 47 ayes, 51 nays, 2 members absent not voting. Unless the majority in the affirmative, the chair declares the amendment lost. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2009 relating to limitations on the use of wages and agency shop fees by employers and labor organizations for political activities.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Capito moves to amend the bill. This is HFA Capito 2-13, number 1.
Are there objections to having the amendment explained in lieu of having it read? There are no objections. Gentleman from the 35th to explain the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We discussed this bill at length in committee, and there was some concern about perhaps an administrative or even a scrivener's error could result in punishment of an employer. The way that the bill's drafted as it is before you without the amendment that I'll explain, it really creates a strict liability situation, meaning that there would be kind of no mens rea, there would be no intent required. So what we wanted to do is ensure that those that are practicing in good faith aren't getting themselves in trouble. So if you go to, I believe it's line 90 on page 5, line 91, we're adding an intent, an intent element here, and adding the word intentionally, so that a person intentionally violating any provision of this section is guilty of a misdemeanor, and so on and so forth. Again, this was just to clarify that somebody that made an innocent mistake was not necessarily going to be guilty of a misdemeanor. I'm happy to take questions on the amendment.
The question before the House is the amendment as just explained by the gentleman from the 35th. Are there members who wish to speak to the amendment? If not, the question is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2014 relating to role of the legislature in appropriating federal funds.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2325 removing the requirement of continuing education for barbers and cosmetologists.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 2366 requiring agencies who have approved a proposed rule that affects fees or other special revenues to provide to the committee a fiscal note.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on second reading? If not, bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2008 amending requirements for licensure relating to elevator mechanics, crane operators, HVAC, electricians, and plumbers.
Are there amendments? It's not amendable on first reading. Chair's in error. Bill will be advanced to second reading. Next bill on first reading.
House Bill 2253, relating to forgery and other crimes concerning lottery tickets.
Bill will be advanced to second reading. For what purpose does the gentleman from the 58th, Delegate Miller, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the House for unanimous consent to be removed from this bill, please.
From which bill, Delegate?
2008.
From House Bill 2008. The gentleman from the 58th, Delegate Miller, asked unanimous consent to be removed as a co-sponsor of House Bill 2008. Are there objections? There are no objections.
Thank you.
Are there further bills on first reading? If not, leaves of absence. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For our colleagues, Delegate Ellington and Linville.
Are there objections to leaves being granted? There are no objections. Leaves of absence will be granted. Introduction of guests, miscellaneous business. If not, lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, subject to announcements, that your House adjourn until 11 a.m. Friday, February 19th.
Are there announcements, lady from the 49th?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Rules will meet at 10:45 tomorrow morning in House Judiciary.
Gentleman the 10th, Delegate Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will have a budget hearing tomorrow, February 19th, at 9 a.m. in the House chambers from the Higher Education Policy Commission and the Community and Technical College System. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman the 32nd, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Judiciary will meet tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock a.m., Government Organization Room. The agenda will be posted.
Gentleman the 13th, Delegate Higginbotham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Education will meet today, this afternoon at 2 o'clock here in the House of Delegates chamber. The agenda is posted. In addition, we will be meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. here in the House chamber, and we will post that agenda as well.
Gentleman the 17th, Delegate Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Health and Human Resources Committee will meet today at 3 p.m. in the Government Organization Room, and the Republican members will caucus in the Chairman's office at 2:45 today. Thank you.
Gentleman the 3rd, Delegate Fluharty.
Democrats will not caucus following floor session. Thank you.
Are there further announcements? If not, the question before the House is the motion by the lady from the 49th that the House. Lady from the 4th, Delegate Zukoff, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like for the remarks from the gentleman of the 36th on Bill 2013 be published in the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Are there further announcements? If not, the question is the motion by the lady from the 49th that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Does the gentleman from the 47th seek recognition?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask that the gentleman from the first comments be printed in the appendix of the journal, please.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. The question is on the motion that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.